A lot of us know it. A lot of us understand it, especially around the holidays when everything's supposed to be happy and joyful. It was a long time ago. I got a phone call around the holidays and found out that I was in Washington as a young senator, not sworn in yet, about to be hiring staff, and I got a call saying from a first responder that there'd been an accident. A tractor trailer broadside on my wife with a Christmas tree on top and my 3 kids inside. My wife and daughter are dead. But my mother, God love her, used to always say, out of everything terrible, something good will happen. Something good has to happen out of this. It just can't be all bad. We've got to make it better. And so, folks, those who have lost someone know how tough it is. And you know how tough it is. You know, in Mayfield, just hours before the storm, we just came from Mayfield, the Gibson Pharmacy had been full of families with children waiting to meet Santa. Now it's completely gone. And so many businesses vital to the community have been so damaged and destroyed, in your town as well. There's a saying in small towns, people know about it when you're born, and they care about it when you die. They know about it when you're born, and they care about it when you die. Well, in so many places, destruction was met with compassion. Neighbors and first responders racing to help and save each other's lives and support. I mean, I'm not joking. I asked when I got to Mayfield, what the first thing my first responders, FEMA, what they heard. They said they were amazed. All they heard was about people just going out helping one another. Everybody, just stepping up. It's incredible. It's incredible how you all step up. And so, folks, you know, the fact is, I'm going to make sure the federal government steps up and makes sure we do every single thing. For years and years, as U.S. Senator and then as Vice President, I come from Delaware, we have a lot of serious storms, hurricanes, oceans rising, a whole range of things. But you know what? It always took a long time. There's no reason why it should take any time. We have the wherewithal to get it done. And we're going to get every single thing you need. And I'm going to make sure the federal government does what's needed. At the state's request, 4 FEMA search and rescue teams are working here in Kentucky right now. For those without power, FEMA's already provided 61 generators. The Army Corps of Engineers has a temporary power install teams ready to assist if needed. And we've provided critical supplies thus far, and a lot more to come. 144,000 liters of drinking water, 24,000 meals, 74,000. And look, thousands of cots and blankets. There are seven shelters open in Kentucky, which are now taking care of 300 occupants, but a lot more is going to occur. Of course, housing is a key. Because of COVID, we want to make sure people are out of those shelters as quickly as they can because of COVID, and ultimately want to start to provide some certainty for people. I've been involved in responding to a lot of disasters, and you can see it in people's faces. What they're really looking for, and look around, I say to the press, what they're looking for is just to be able to put their head down on a pillow, be able to close their eyes, take a deep breath, go to sleep, and make sure their kids are okay. That's what people are looking for right now. But a lot of hard work is going to happen in the next 2 and 3 months to bring it all the way back. And so, folks, the governor, I want to provide you the certainty as well. I just approved the request that I wasn't sure I had the authority to do, but turns out I do. The government's going to cover 100% of the cost. 100% of the cost for the first 30 days for all the emergency work, from clearing everything to every single cost the federal government's going to take care of. And it includes debris removal, cost of overtime and law enforcement, emergency service personnel, and shelter. And that'll get you through. And by the way, I want to thank your wife. She started a toy drive for this part of the state to make sure, how many, come here. I'm taking credit for something I have nothing to do with.
How could you?
But tell them what you got so far.
Well, as of this morning, we think that we have around 20,000 gifts donated, and we've got 3 more days to go.
20,000 gifts, so no kid's going to go to sleep wherever they get to sleep tonight without a gift. God love you. And look, we also need to recognize that people have suffered mental and emotional injuries. The cost of this sometimes are unseen and unknown. People talk about post-traumatic stress in the battlefield as I travel through Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, guess what? There's a lot of post-traumatic stress that comes from lying in your house and all of a sudden the roof goes blowing off and you wonder whether your kids are around. I really mean it. So, where the shock of losing a home and a business, the grief of losing someone, it's happening right before the holidays, I said, and we're going to make sure that you have all the help you need, including the kind of mental help that's needed to help people through difficult times. And folks, the FEMA has opened mobile disaster recovery centers in Mayfield and in Dawson Springs, and it has disaster survivor assistance teams on the ground here in Kentucky to help people register for assistance. As I said when I talked to the governor, not only that we're going to get what you need, we're going to make sure you know everything's available, because you don't always know all that is available. And that's what we're going to do. And folks, if you live in infected areas, which all of you who stand here watching me do, you visit disasterassistance.gov, or call 1-800-621-FEMA. That's 1-800-621-3362. I promise you, you're going to heal, we're going to recover, you're going to rebuild, you're going to be stronger than you were before. We're going to build back better than it was. And when I come back, I got one beautiful lady and her husband promised me a meal. She's apparently a hell of a cook, so I'm coming back for the meal. So thank you for being here. And to all the families here, keep the faith. We're going to get this done. I promise you, the governor's not walking away, your county judge is not walking away, your congressman's not walking away, no one's walking away. We're in this for the long haul. Thank you very much for your patience. Not now. We don't need it yet. We don't need it now. There has been, because of weather disasters, just this year, over $99 billion in losses. $99 billion in losses. And as I flew, telling folks here, as I was out with the governor of California and Idaho and other states, as you fly over those territories for the better part of an hour, looking down, every single solitary thing is leveled because of the fires. Nothing there. The forest, the homes, the businesses. And guess what? So much area has burned this year because of weather and climate changes that is larger than the entire state of New Jersey. The entire state of New Jersey. That's how much land has been burned to the ground. So we got a lot to do. We got a lot to do, but the American people are ready to do it. This is the United States of America. There's not a darn thing we can't do. Thank you.
So that was just one of the events for President Biden today as he headed out to Mayfield, Kentucky. He also spoke with some local leaders at a roundtable meeting as well. So we'll be playing that out for you later into the evening here. But it's pretty amazing to see the wreckage just right behind him during that press conference. You can see the house, the home, just completely disheveled. These neighborhoods torn apart quite literally. And in the midst of all of this, we have other storms that are coming through this evening. Here's a look at our radar right here. 90+ mile per hour winds reporting in 6 states, and tornado warnings in several areas, including now in Minnesota. We've been getting full coverage from Fox Weather, and we'll be getting back into that, dipping in and out as things progress through the rest of the evening here. We are going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll be hitting on some of the other top stories of the day, including the Kim Potter trial. We'll get a full recap and breakdown from Fox 9's Paul Bloom, who's been inside of the courtroom for quite a bit of this trial. That's coming up in 2 minutes. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Daytona Everett. It is almost 6:30 here in Phoenix, Arizona, 8:30 out on the East Coast. We've been covering quite a bit of weather, and we'll be keeping our eyes on the radar here as there are tornado warnings across the country. 90+ mile-per-hour winds reported in 6 different states. Now things really moving toward Minnesota at this point in time, and Cedar Rapids, you can see, is on the outskirts of where that storm system is moving. So more to come on all of that. Speaking of Minnesota, though, the Kim Potter trial entering its day 6. We are almost a week into this trial. Fox 9's Paul Bloom came on the show a little bit earlier and gave us a pretty good breakdown of those final witnesses that were called by the state to the stand today. Joining us from the studio, Paul, a busy day today and emotional testimony from his father, right?
A very important day in this trial, in that we do believe these are the last final witnesses the state is going to call under its primary case. They didn't formally rest at the end of today. They'll probably sleep on this and then do so in the morning. But we absolutely think these final witnesses, the state's paid use of force expert who came in to assess Kimberly Potter's actions that day, and then, as you mentioned it, Daunte Wright's father, Arbery Wright. Now, what's interesting in Minnesota court law, if you will, or court practices, is it allows for what we call spark of life testimony. It says really nothing to do with the incident, the scene that day, the traffic stop in April. What this is just to humanize the deceased, allow a loved one, a family member, to talk about their grief and what the loss has meant to their family. Take a listen.
I was so happy for him because he was so happy. He was so happy about Junior. This was my chance to be a grandfather.
Did they have a close relationship?
Yes.
And did Daunte Jr. spend a lot of time with your family as well?
Yeah. Daunte Jr., Daunte lived with us. Junior was pretty much there every day. And he loved his son.
And of course, they had shown a photo in court of young 20-year-old Daunte with his baby son there, Junior, Daunte Jr., Arbery, referencing how emotional it is that Junior no longer has his father around. But again, Arbery just on the stand for a couple of minutes, just allowed to kind of speak to the loss, the grief the family is feeling. Important to point out there that defense did not even bother cross-examining him.
Right. Well, this isn't the only family member that's taken the stand of Daunte Wright. His mother also taking the stand in the very beginning, right?
Yeah, very good point. The state started this case 1 week ago, basically mother and father bookending this case, sort of the emotions at the start, the emotions at the end. The mother was a little bit different type of witness. She was a fact witness in that you may remember her testimony. She's on the phone with Daunte during the traffic stop. Elena, the girlfriend in the seat over, turning the video camera on Daunte. So she had some factual evidence she had to get in and on the record. And of course, that emotional scene where she rushes to the scene and just wants information and sees her son lying under that sheet, that law enforcement white sheet. So her testimony a little bit different, but clearly the state knew they wanted to get this jury in with some emotion, and they wanted to end their case with some emotion. Again, Daytona, I expect the state to formally rest first thing tomorrow morning when court gavels into session.
Paul, any key takeaways from, obviously, the father stepping up was probably the biggest takeaway from today, but from the use of force expert and then also an officer taking the stand. And there was also a bit of evidence that was denied by the judge when it comes to Wright trying to flee that day.
Yeah, you watch this thing closely today, Daytona. All right, let's bring you up to speed. Now, the use of training officer from Brooklyn Center, his testimony bridging both days. Nothing terribly remarkable today about his testimony. I think the jury takes away the state's use of force expert. This is Seth Stoughton. He's a University of South Carolina associate law professor. He's a former police officer. And interesting to note on this day where there's been some news in federal court with Derek Chauvin's guilty plea. Seth Stoughton was the state's use of force expert in Derek Chauvin's murder trial and testified. So he's become a familiar face here in the Twin Cities. But Stoughton is called in. He's paid. He assesses all of the body camera videos. He's a quote-unquote expert, an authority on police policy and use of force, and he assesses the actions of Kimberly Potter that day. And what's interesting is because of this two-pronged approach the defense is taking, that it was an accident, it was an innocent mistake, but also if she had attempted to use deadly force, she would have been authorized to stop a fleeing Dante Wright with one of her officers in danger. So the expert did have to kind of toe this line and address all of these issues. Basically, was it a mistake? Did she have the right to use her taser? Did she have her right to use her firearm? And this expert, Professor Stoughton, did basically double down. He says, no, she did not have the right to use the taser, and no, she did not have the right to fire her gun. So in both cases, she is at fault and should be held criminally liable. And you mentioned the piece of evidence that didn't come in. What had happened is as he was assessing that traffic stop, he said that had Dante Wright just been allowed to leave the scene, the officers got backed away, he's wanted on a gross misdemeanor count, they knew the identity of that young man, and they could have tracked him down afterwards. But the defense wanted to say, wait a minute, he's not an easy guy to track down. He's run from police before. He's run from arrests before. And we want this jury to know it wasn't that simple. Right. And in the end, Judge Chu said, there's no way Kimberly Potter knew that in that moment. The jury will not hear that testimony. So that sort of prior bad acts, if you will, remains out. The jury didn't hear anything of it.
So that was denied. And tomorrow, marking day 7, a week of this trial, although, Paul, it feels a lot longer than that. And you say the state likely will rest tomorrow.
Exactly. And then the defense starts calling witnesses, Daytona, and then the jury's been promised Kim Potter, the defendant, so she will take the stand. The question is when. There were some logistics that they were going over today, and the way they were talking, I wouldn't necessarily expect her tomorrow. They have several of their own experts. They also have some character witnesses they want to get to. I would mark it down on your calendar. Look for Kim Potter on the witness stand Friday heading into the weekend. And
we'll have it definitely here on Live Now from Fox. Last one for you, Paul, just because you covered the Derek Chauvin trial so closely. He pleaded guilty to violating George Floyd's civil rights today. What are your takeaways from that?
Well, a couple interesting things, right? The intersection of these two cases. You may remember in April when this trial was going on, the state case, or at least the trial of Derek Chauvin in state court, that's when the Kimberly Potter, Dante Wright traffic stop occurred. So these cases have been linked. So the fact that there was this guilty plea today while Kimberly Potter's trial was happening was just sort of interesting. But the one takeaway I would have is Derek Chauvin in the end wasn't sentenced in the federal court. The government, the U.S. government, and his defense team agreeing on a 25-year sentence. This judge is going to wait on it. He's going to do a pre-sentence investigation before leveling the formal sentence, but it looks like he'll get 25 years. And I would just point out as you move on here is in the federal prison system, a prisoner does typically 85% of their time behind bars and then the final 15% under supervision. In state court, where he was sentenced to 22.5 years, here in Minnesota, a prisoner only typically does 2/3 of that sentence, 67%. So he took on more prison time today. He avoids trial, but no doubt he's taking on more prison time.
All right, well, that's a fantastic breakdown. Fox 9's Paul Bloom for us there, covering multiple angles of what's going on in Minnesota today. We appreciate you.
You bet, Daytona. Thank you.
So again, Paul Bloom from earlier, and we'll be taking the trial of Kim Potter live tomorrow as things really start to ramp up into the rest of the week. We do want to just remind you we're keeping our eyes on our system here as we are hearing there are now tornado warnings in northeast Iowa as well. Our Fox Weather team tracking it closely, so we'll be popping in and out of a bit of their coverage. We are going to take a commercial break. When we come back, though, we're talking about the second outage out for Amazon, the second Amazon outage in 2 weeks, causing quite the disruption for streaming services, for warehouses, and possibly for your holiday shopping. So details on that in 2 minutes. Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. The second Amazon outage in 2 weeks, causing disruptions in streaming services, automated warehouses, and also slowing or even stopping some of those deliveries that you are expecting ahead of the holidays. Well, we have Joe Stefani. He's the president of Amazon e-commerce shop Desert Cactus here on the line. Joe, thanks so much for being with us here on the show. A major inconvenience for a lot of businesses today because of this outage.
Absolutely, a lot.
Yeah, so this is the second one, like I said, in the past 2 weeks. Could this happen again? And if it does happen again, what should businesses do?
Well, they're saying that it's not going to happen again. However, this is the second time in the past week that it has happened.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the second time, and obviously we know a lot of these businesses are struggling right now with knowing how to adapt around this and keep things moving when literally their workplaces are turned upside down. So what are your thoughts on moving forward? If it does happen again, how should businesses react?
Well, first off, from a consumer perspective, people need to go through and order their packages as soon as possible for Christmas. Like today's disruptions are a little bit different than what they were last week. So for example, right now you're looking at QuickBooks, DoorDash, Hulu, PlayStation. Those types of things were being disrupted this time around, where last time, you're talking about Disney Plus, McDonald's, Netflix, Facebook. So it's totally different than it was beforehand.
Yeah, and like you said, what are the types of businesses, other types of businesses that could be affected from this moving forward? Like you said, McDonald's, Facebook, Netflix. We saw that Facebook outage not too long ago, and that really affected a lot of people, but that was more on the Facebook side, right?
Yeah, what you saw beforehand, like last week with the outage, is you saw merchants like us who are third-party service providers, who are third-party merchants that are going through and are finding that we couldn't send packages to Amazon directly.
Right.
So what happened with that is we found, about 10 to 12,000 items we couldn't even send into Amazon's warehouses ourselves. We couldn't send out, several thousand packages to customers. So we're hoping that if there is an outage again, that we are not going to find us in a position where we can't do anything at all, where we're paralyzed with our business.
So what has the communication been like with Amazon through all of this?
They've been communicating with us third-party merchants a bunch, just letting us know that, hey, we're hoping this is not going to happen again. But at the same time, they've said this beforehand too, where for us, this is the second time that this has happened, and there definitely is concerns with, is this going to happen again or not? And especially for this week, because this is the busiest week for us to get packages out to customers.
Yeah, that's so right. We know that Christmas, it's amazing to think, is just a week away, and so many consumers are out there trying to get their shopping done. So I know you kind of mentioned just a little bit, any last tips and tricks for consumers ahead of the holidays with all of these things that are going on, outages, possible outages with Amazon and other companies as well?
Yeah, so the first thing with Amazon is if you're going to be buying stuff, make sure anything you buy has a Prime badge on it, meaning that you're going to get that item. It could be same day, it could be next day, it could be within 2 days. If you're shopping on other merchants, like Target, Walmart, and others like that, if there's an option for buying online and picking up in store, that is the best option. That way you don't have to deal with potential issues when it comes to UPS, FedEx delays, the post office. So those are probably the best 2 tips that I have for people. And obviously you want to order as soon as possible. Like I said beforehand, we're finding with our sales that this is the busiest week by far for us for the holiday shopping season. So if they can place orders tonight or even tomorrow, it's the best option, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And outages on top of supply chain issues, on top of inflation, just a tough year for the American consumer. Well, we appreciate having you on the show. Thank you so much, and good luck ahead of the holidays. Hopefully no other outages in you guys' future.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, we're going to take one more break here, and it was a big day also when it comes to what the expectations are moving forward with inflation. We heard from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. We'll be playing out some of the latest from him and what he has to say to the American consumer coming up after the break. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox 645 here in Phoenix, Arizona. We are tracking all of these weather events across the country. A look from Ames, Iowa, from the ISU Weather STEM camera as things have slowed down out there. But Minnesota looks like it is going to be one of the spots hit hard as we pull up our weather system here. You can see in Cedar Rapids and also Minneapolis as it moves up through the Midwest right there. Like we said, it is just a warning at this time. So if we get any more details from our Fox Weather team, we'll, of course, bring it to you as soon as we get it. Well, before the break, we were talking about some of the inflation concerns, especially ahead of the holidays. Well, we got an update from the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell. Here's what he had to say.
This year, reflecting progress on vaccinations and the reopening of the economy. Aggregate demand remains very strong, buoyed by fiscal and monetary policy support and the healthy financial positions of households and businesses. The rise in COVID cases in recent weeks, along with the emergence of the Omicron variant, pose risks to the outlook. Notwithstanding the effects of the virus and supply constraints, FOMC participants continue to foresee rapid growth. As shown in our summary of economic projections, the median projection for real GDP growth stands at 5.5% this year and 4% next year. Amid improving labor market conditions and very strong demand for workers, the economy has been making rapid progress toward maximum employment. Job gains have been solid in recent months, averaging 378,000 per month over the last 3 months. The unemployment rate has declined substantially, falling 0.6 percentage point since our last meeting and reaching 4.2% in November. The recent improvements in labor market conditions have narrowed the differences in employment across groups, especially for workers at the lower end of the wage distribution, as well as for African Americans and Hispanics. Labor force participation showed a welcome rise in November, but remains subdued, in part reflecting the aging of the population and retirements. In addition, some who otherwise would be seeking work report that they are out of the labor force because of factors related to the pandemic, including caregiving needs and ongoing concerns about the virus. At the same time, employers are having difficulties filling job openings, and wages are rising at their fastest pace in many years. How long the labor shortages will persist is unclear, particularly if additional waves of the virus occur. Looking ahead, FOMC participants project the labor market to continue to improve, with the median projection for the unemployment rate declining to 3.5% by the end of the year. Compared with the projections made in September, participants have revised their unemployment rate projections noticeably lower for this year and next. Supply and demand imbalances related to the pandemic and the reopening of the economy have continued to contribute to elevated levels of inflation. In particular, bottlenecks and supply constraints are limiting how quickly production can respond to higher demand in the near term. These problems have been larger and longer lasting than anticipated, exacerbated by waves of the virus. As a result, overall inflation is running well above our 2% longer run goal and will likely continue to do so well into next year. While the drivers of higher inflation have been predominantly connected to the dislocations caused by the pandemic, price increases have now spread to a broader range of goods and services. Wages have also risen briskly, but thus far, wage growth has not been a major contributor to the elevated levels of inflation. We are attentive to the risks that persistent real wage growth in excess of productivity could put to upward pressure on inflation. Like most forecasters, we continue to expect inflation to decline to levels closer to our 2% longer run goal by the end of next year. The median inflation projection of FOMC participants falls from 5.3% this year to 2.6% next year. This trajectory is notably higher than projected in September. We understand that high inflation imposes significant hardship, especially on those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials, like food, housing, and transportation. We are committed to our price stability goal. We will use our tools both to support the economy and a strong labor market, and to prevent higher inflation from becoming entrenched. We will be watching carefully to see whether the economy is evolving in line with expectations. The Fed's monetary policy actions have been guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. In support of these goals, the committee reaffirmed the 0 to 1/4% target range for the federal funds rate. We also updated our assessment of the progress the economy has made toward the criteria specified in our forward guidance for the federal funds rate. With inflation having exceeded 2% for some time, the committee expects it will be appropriate to maintain this target range until labor market conditions have reached levels consistent with the committee's assessments of maximum employment. All FOMC participants forecast that this remaining test will be met next year. The median projection for the appropriate level of the federal funds rate is 0.9% at the end of 2022, about a half percentage point higher than projected in September. Participants expect a gradual pace of policy firming, with the level of the federal funds rate generally near estimates of its longer-run level by the end of 2024. Of course, these projections do not represent a committee decision or plan, and no one knows with any certainty where the economy will be a year or more from now. At today's meeting, the committee also decided to double the pace of reductions in its asset purchases. Beginning in mid-January, we will reduce the monthly pace of our net asset purchases by $20 billion for Treasury securities and $10 billion for agency mortgage-backed securities. If the economy evolves broadly as expected, similar reductions in the pace of net asset purchases will likely be appropriate each month, implying that increases in our securities holdings would cease by mid-March, a few months sooner than we anticipated in early November. We are phasing out our purchases more rapidly because with elevated inflation pressures and a rapidly strengthening labor market, the economy no longer needs increasing amounts of policy support. In addition, a quicker conclusion of our asset purchases will better position policy to address the full range of plausible economic outcomes. We remain prepared to adjust the pace of purchases if warranted by changes in the economic outlook. And even after our balance sheet stops expanding, our holdings of securities will continue to foster accommodative financial conditions. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to complete the recovery in employment and achieve our price stability goal. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll go to Rachel from the Washington Post.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you, Chair Powell, for taking our questions. The latest FOMC materials say that the FOMC thinks it will be appropriate to keep rates near zero until labor market conditions reach levels consistent with maximum employment. And there are also 3 rate hikes penciled in the projections for next year. In order to set up those hikes, what will maximum employment have to look like? When will you know that that threshold has been met? And how will that be communicated? Thank you.
So maximum employment, if you look at our statement of longer run goals and monetary policy strategy, maximum employment is something that we look at a broad range of indicators. And those would include, of course, things like the unemployment rate, the labor force participation rate, job openings, wages, flows in and out of the labor force and various parts of the labor force. We'd also tend to look broadly and inclusively at different demographic groups and not just at the headline and aggregate numbers. So that's a judgment for the committee to make. The committee will make a judgment that we've achieved labor market conditions consistent with maximum employment. When it makes that, it is admittedly a judgment call because it's a range of factors. Unlike inflation, where we have one number that sort of dominates, it's a broad range of things. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, in my view, we are making rapid progress toward maximum employment. And you see that in, of course, in some of the factors that I mentioned.
Great. Thank you. Steve at CNBC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, if it's often said that monetary policy has long and variable lags, how does continuing to buy assets now, even though it's at a slower pace, address the current inflation problem? Won't the impact of today's changes not really have any impact for 6 months or a year down the road on the current inflation problem? And aren't you actually lengthening that time by continuing to buy assets such that it could be not until the long and variable lag after you end purchases sometime in March that you'll start to have any impact on the inflation problem?
So on the first part of your question, which is why not stop purchasing now, I would just say this. We've learned that in dealing with balance sheet issues, we've learned that it's best to take a careful, sort of methodical approach to make adjustments. Markets can be sensitive to it, and we thought that this was a doubling of the speed. We're basically 2 meetings away now from finishing the taper, and we thought that was the appropriate way to go. So we announced it, and that's what will happen. The question of long and variable lags is an interesting one. That's Milton Friedman's famous statement, and I do think that in this world where where the global financial markets are connected together, financial conditions can change very quickly. And my own sense is that they get into financial conditions affect the economy fairly rapidly, longer than the traditional thought of, a year or 18 months, shorter than that, rather. But in addition, when we communicate about what we're going to do, the markets move immediately to that. So financial conditions are changing to reflect the forecast that we made, and basically, which was, I think, fairly in line with what markets were expecting. But financial conditions don't wait to change until things actually happen. They change on the expectation of things happening. So I don't think it's a question of having to wait.
Can I just follow up in thinking about having to wait? Is it still the policy or the position of the committee that you will not raise rates until the taper is complete? Thank you.
Yes, the sense of that, of course, being that buying assets is adding accommodation and raising rates is removing accommodation. Since we're 2 meetings away from completing the taper, assuming things go as expected, I think if we wanted to lift off before then you would stop the taper potentially sooner. But it's not something I expect to happen. But I do not think it would be appropriate, and we don't find ourselves in a situation where we might have to raise rates while we're still purchasing assets.
Okay, let's go to Colby at the FT.
Thank you, Michelle. Chair Powell, I'm curious exactly how much distance you think there should be between the end of the taper and the first interest rate increase. Back in 2014, the guidance was that was given was for the Fed funds rate to remain at the target level for a considerable time after the end of the asset purchase program. Is that an approach you support now, or does the current economic situation warrant something a bit different? Thank you.
So we haven't made any decision of that nature, and so no, I wouldn't say that's our position at all. We really haven't taken a position on that. I will say that we did talk today. We had our first discussion about the balance sheet, for example, and we went through the sequence of events regarding the runoff and that sort of thing with the balance sheet last time. And I think people thought that was an interesting discussion. They thought that it was informative, but people pointed out that this is a significantly different economic situation that we have at the current time, and that the differences that we see now would tend to influence how we think about the balance sheet. And the same thing would be true about raising rates. I don't foresee that there would be that kind of very extended wait at this time. The economy is so much stronger. I was here at the Fed when we lifted off the last time, and the economy is so much stronger now. It's so much closer to full employment. Inflation is running well above target, and growth is well above potential. There wouldn't be the need for that kind of long delay. Having said that, we'll make this decision in coming meetings, and it's not a decision that the committee has really focused on yet.
Let's go to Nick at the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. Nick Timoros at the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, in March, you answered a question about maximum employment like this. You said 4% would be a nice unemployment rate to get to, but it'll take more than that to get to maximum employment. More recently, you have hinted at a possible distinction between the level of maximum employment that's achievable in the short run versus in the long run. Has your view of the level of maximum employment changed this year, and if so, how? And how close is the economy right now to your judgment of the short run level of maximum employment? Thank you.
Right. So the thing is, we're not going back to the same economy we had in February of 2020, and I think early on the sense was that's where we were headed. The post-pandemic labor market and the economy in general will be different, and the maximum level of employment that's consistent with price stability evolves over time within a business cycle and over a longer period, in part reflecting evolution of the factors that affect labor supply, including those related to the pandemic. So I would say, look, we're at 4.2% now, and the unemployment rate has been dropping very quickly. So we're already in the vicinity of 4%. The way in which the important metric that has been disappointing really has been labor force participation, of course, where we had widely thought, I had certainly thought that last fall, as unemployment insurance ran off, as vaccinations increased, as schools reopened, that we would see a significant surge, if you will, or at least a surge in labor force participation. So we've begun to see some improvement. We certainly welcome the 0.2 improvement that we got in the November report. But I do think that it feels likely now that the return to higher participation is going to take longer. And in fact, that's been the pattern in past cycles, that labor force participation has tended to recover in the wake of a strong recovery in unemployment, which is what we're getting right now. So it could well have been that this cycle was different because of the short nature of it and the very strong, the number of job openings, for example. You would have thought that would have pulled people back.
Okay, so we've been listening to the chairman of the Federal Reserve there, Jerome Powell, talk about he was anticipating a higher surge of labor force participation this year into next. He was kind of lamenting the fact that it hasn't been as quick as he had expected. But the headline out of this press conference today, this December meeting, the Federal Reserve indicating that it sees as many as 3 rate hikes coming in 2022 as the central bank contends with a recent surge in inflation. The Fed is also expecting to raise rates twice more in 2023, followed by another 2 hikes in 2024. Inflation was on the mind of many of the reporters, asking Powell questions there if he sees any light at the end of the tunnel as far as inflation is concerned. But he was saying there's a real risk inflation may be more persistent. He's also saying that the Omicron variant is a risk. He doesn't accept or think that should be impacting accelerated taper plans. So they are focusing on making sure their bond tapering is double than what they had originally planned for in September. All right, we're coming up on the top of the hour here. Well, it is the top of the hour here now in Phoenix, Arizona. A little after 7 o'clock here, I'm Andrew Kraft. We want to thank you for being with us. We're going to take a quick commercial break. A major hearing today in the Senate. Many of the airline CEOs facing tough questions from senators as far as COVID protocols go on their airlines. So we'll have that and more in just a moment. Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft, and we're going to continue with some more of this economic, consumer, and business-oriented news at the moment. We just heard from Jerome Powell there announcing that they are intending to raise interest rates in 2022. We're going to hear now, though, from the Senate hearing today, and many of the top airline CEOs testifying, taking questions from senators about a whole host of issues, including their COVID-19 protocols. So we're going to play a little bit of this from earlier today in Washington.
And the rest of this committee. We at American Airlines are deeply grateful for the pandemic assistance we received through the CARES Act and the Payroll Support Program. We're extremely appreciative of everyone who made it possible, including the members of this committee. You showed leadership at a time that it was needed most. And you demonstrated a commitment to our industry and our team members that made a lasting impact. So I'd like to take a moment to say thank you and to assure you that the support of the U.S. government extended to us was well worth it. I want to state it succinctly and unequivocally, the Payroll Support Program has been an overwhelming success. American Airlines fought hard for the CARES Act and the subsequent extensions of PSP. And we did so in close partnership with lawmakers from both parties and in lockstep with our labor union partners. PSP shows what can be accomplished through bipartisanship and compromise. And all those who were involved in crafting the program deserve a great deal of credit. When the CARES Act passed, we understood that receiving financial support from the federal government comes with an obligation to serve. It was an obligation we were ready, willing, and humbled to accept, and and we are very proud of how our team has delivered. Thanks to PSP, we have the team in place that we need to run our airline successfully. In fact, at American Airlines, we have as many or more pilots and flight attendants per scheduled crew block hour this year as we've had in years preceding the pandemic. So with our team at the ready, we've been able to run a safe and reliable airline and continue providing critical air service, including to small and rural communities. As I've outlined in my written testimony, American Airlines and all U.S. carriers are delivering on our commitments with an overall operational performance this year that is as good or better than before the pandemic. Not only has American performed well, we've done so while growing back at an unprecedented pace. We grew by an industry-leading 82% from the first quarter to the second quarter of this year, and we are providing significantly more service to the flying public than any of our competitors. We took that aggressive approach because the central purpose of PSP was to ensure we were able to provide air service when travelers decided they were ready to get back to flying. In addition to the strong year-to-date operational performance I mentioned, I'm also pleased to say that American delivered a stellar performance over the Thanksgiving travel period, and we're off to a great start in December as we look toward the upcoming holidays. I'm extremely proud of how our team has stepped up as demand has rebounded. They've shown tremendous professionalism and dedication to the customers we've had the privilege to care for. Now, like other airlines and numerous other businesses, we have experienced some operational challenges in recent months, which we've worked to manage as deftly as possible and with the utmost care for our customers and our team. While various pandemic-related factors have caused our operation to run tight when extraordinary disruptions occur, these events have been the distinct exception, not the rule. A strong U.S. airline industry has been and will continue to be critical to the overall economic recovery from COVID-19. Because of your leadership, U.S. airlines are competing vigorously. Fares have remained low, and we are doing our part as an industry to support the ongoing economic recovery. Indeed, according to the DOT, the average domestic itinerary fare in 2019 was the lowest inflation-adjusted annual fare on record, and fares have declined further yet in 2020 and 2021. So in summary, I am incredibly proud of how the American Airlines team has managed through the pandemic. Early on, we agreed that this one day would pass. And what would matter most is how we treated each other, our customers, and those in our care. Looking back, I'm extremely proud of the decisions we made and of the values we used to guide us. And on a personal note, I have been humbled by the thousands of American Airlines team members who have thanked me for fighting for their jobs. So it gives me tremendous pleasure today to pass those thanks along to you. So thank you for your support of our team, for all you've done to protect the vitality of our industry. I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barker. Mr. Kelly, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of the committee. Good afternoon. My name is Gary Kelly, and I'm very privileged to serve as the Chairman and CEO at Southwest Airlines. So thank you for inviting me to testify here on behalf of the more than 54,000 Southwest employees who directly benefited from the payroll support program. And I can sum up the PSP in 2 words: it worked. Our employees have endured unprecedented challenges over the last 2 years, from new federal requirements to unruly passengers, but I couldn't be more proud of them for their resilience and their resolve. They're nothing short of heroic, and PSP secured their jobs and their pay and their benefits. So I want to start by expressing my heartfelt appreciation to you all and to members of Congress, and certainly this committee. In a bipartisan fashion, Congress recognized the severity of the COVID-19 threat and heeded the call for swift, decisive action. Passing the PSP within weeks, despite this incredible achievement, no one could have predicted what happened in the months that followed. Multiple waves of COVID cases, new COVID-19 variants, changes in government policies, volatile demand for air travel, and record financial losses for every single airline. Even with the turbulence that was brought on by the global pandemic, your commitment to protecting the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of airline workers never wavered. And most importantly, you saw the PSP as a successful program worthy of not 1, but 2 extensions. And for that, on behalf of all Southwest Airlines, I'm eternally grateful. At Southwest, we take pride in being a maverick, including being about as well prepared for this crisis as any company, let alone any airline, can be. And looking back at early 2020, we entered the pandemic in a strong financial position. We had over $5 billion in liquidity. We had very modest debt. We had record low financial leverage and a low cost structure. As the pandemic unfolded, we took aggressive and appropriate self-help measures to remain solvent, eliminating discretionary spending, right-sizing our flight schedule, and cutting executive compensation. At the same time, Southwest has never achieved our low cost on the backs of our employees. We're 83% unionized. We offer industry-leading retirement and health benefits. We're consistently ranked on Fortune's list of the world's most admired companies and Glassdoor's list of best places to work. And until 2020, our employees received profit-sharing contributions each and every year since 1972, which is an unprecedented streak of profits of 47 years. So for Southwest, the source of our strength and success is our people. And they've always been my top priority, and my number one concern is our employees' health and job security. And funds received through the PSP were only used for qualifying employee salaries, wages, and benefits. We did not cut pay rates. We did not cut hours. We did not cut benefits. We did not lay off, and we did not furlough. We actually have raised our employees' pay. And my biggest source of pride is that Southwest has never had an involuntary layoff or furlough in our 50-year history. Southwest is also the only major airline to maintain service at every domestic airport that we served before the pandemic. And moreover, in the last 22 months, we launched service to 18 new airports. It's also a testament to our people that we've been the best year-to-date DOT customer satisfaction ranking among marketing carriers and the highest net promoter score in the industry. By every measure, we lived up to the letter and the spirit of the PSP as Congress intended. Our operational performance during the week of Thanksgiving underscores our focus on reliability, and we knew the challenges of a busy holiday season and week might bring, and implemented several enhancements to support our customers and our employees. And in a week where we served over 2 million customers, we operated nearly 24,000 flights with a 99.9% completion rate and only 12 cancellations. Our DOT on-time performance for the week was 88.3%, and on November the 28th, 2021's busiest travel day based on the TSA numbers, Southwest had the highest on-time performance in the industry. So in closing, I'm extremely proud of our company's record of taking care of our employees and our customers and the communities that we serve. As I've said to many in the past year, it was messy going into this pandemic. It's going to be messy coming out. But for as long as the pandemic persists, we'll continue to be cautious and focused on reliability. And I assure you that no matter what challenge is presented to us next, taking care of our employees and our customers remains Southwest's primary goal. So thank you all again for your tremendous support during our darkest hours as a company and as an industry. And I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you so much for that testimony. We'll now turn to Mr. Kirby. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss United Airlines' response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the payroll support program's assistance to companies like United. On behalf of all the United employees and our industry, I'd like to thank Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and all the members of this committee and the federal government for your support during the most challenging time in our shared history. As I begin, I also want to publicly thank our 80,000 United employees who have performed so admirably and worked so tirelessly throughout this pandemic to take care of our customers and each other. Our United team in the airports, on board our aircraft, and all throughout our global network have been on the front lines of this crisis from day one and helped ensure anyone or anything, including medical equipment and vaccines, who needed to travel throughout the pandemic could do so safely. The COVID-19 pandemic is the most disruptive crisis in the history of commercial aviation, with both a devastating human and economic toll. The quick response by the federal government with the rapid implementation of the PSP prevented what would have been an unprecedented shutdown of air service that would have impacted the U.S. and world economy for years to come. The PSP allowed us to maintain operational consistency, avoiding the challenges that shutdowns, mass involuntary layoffs, and furloughs would have created. United supplemented the federal support with our own unprecedented cost-cutting and fundraising efforts. PSP also gave us the time and the bridge to the private capital markets, where we raised an additional $23 billion in debt. At the same time we were shoring up our finances, we were also taking early and aggressive action to mitigate the impact of the virus on our employees and our customers. We led on safety throughout the crisis. We were the first airline and amongst the first companies to require masks last April. And this August, we implemented our vaccine requirement well ahead of any government directive for the sole and simple reason that we believed it was the right thing to do for safety. Today, we remain the first and only airline to successfully complete a vaccination requirement for employees. We also leaned into our responsibility to keep the country and the world connected. We operated more than 130 repatriation flights, brought home more than 18,000 stranded Americans, booked close to 3,000 free flights for medical volunteers, and transported hundreds of millions of pounds of medical kits, PPE, and medical equipment. And United continues to fly vaccines around the world. We've already flown over 400 million vaccines since they were first ready for distribution. Throughout the pandemic, United and many members of Congress worked closely with our unions, and I want to recognize and thank the Airline Pilots Association, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, the Association of Flight Attendants, and the Professional Airline Flight Control Association. The PSP not only kept the airline running, but it also kept the economy moving during a time of great uncertainty. As customers began to fly again, we took a gradual approach to building back our schedule. We knew it would be challenging to try to bring flights back all at once and too quickly, so we made the conscious decision to gradually add capacity over time. While this choice sacrificed short-term profits, it allowed us to ensure a reliable service and to largely avoid any widespread operational impacts to our customers. But even in the depth of the crisis, we always kept an eye on the future. For customers, we invested in technologies and enacted new policies to make travel easier and more enjoyable. We got rid of change fees forever for travel within the U.S. We're investing in features like large overhead bins, seatback entertainment, and fast Wi-Fi. And our mobile app was the first to let customers check their destination's travel requirements, schedule COVID-19 tests, and upload and validate vaccine records using artificial intelligence. From an employment perspective, we've already hired more than 5,000 people this year into careers with high pay and benefits, and expect to hire approximately 10,000 more next year. And for our communities, United is the leading global airline in the fight against climate change. We're leading in sustainable aviation fuels, electric aircraft, and hydrogen aircraft, just to name a few. While the COVID-19 pandemic has been the most disruptive global crisis in the history of aviation, United is emerging as a leader and as a better airline for our customers and employees. The payroll support program was a vital aid when our industry and our employees needed it most. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before this committee and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Thank you very much for being here. Mr. Lochter.
Good afternoon, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and discuss the status of the U.S. airline industry during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is John Lochter, and I have the privilege of serving as Delta's Executive Vice President and Chief of Operations. I've been with Delta for over 28 years, serving in several leadership positions. I look forward to sharing the measures Delta has taken to address the crisis by protecting the health of our customers and the safety and jobs of our people, who have done an outstanding job throughout the pandemic. I also look forward to discussing our compliance with the payroll support programs. Currently, I'm responsible for ensuring that we provide safe, reliable, industry-leading operations across the globe. I directly oversee Delta's global flying operations, maintenance services, and safety and security groups, over 22,000 Delta professionals. Delta and all of its employees are extremely grateful to this committee and the rest of the U.S. Congress for your support throughout the pandemic. The pandemic has reminded us all the importance of cooperation and taking care of one another in our community. I'm so proud of how the Delta team pulled together for each other and for our customers during this time. In the early days of the pandemic, demand for air travel evaporated by nearly 95%. Forcing Delta to take decisive action to preserve jobs without compromising on employee and customer safety. We parked or retired more than 650 aircraft and consolidated facilities at airports nationwide. We cut executive compensation, and more than 40,000 employees volunteered for unpaid leaves of absences. The Delta community truly came together during an extraordinarily stressful and difficult time. Delta people led the way in demonstrating our commitment to health and safety. We moved quickly at the onset of the pandemic to transform the industry standard of cleanliness to ensure a safe and comfortable travel experience for our customers and employees. In the span of a few months, we implemented a rigorous cleaning regimen on board our aircraft and in all of our facilities, a broad employee COVID testing program, the industry's first mask requirement, contact tracing on international flights, and other pandemic protocols that have protected the safety of our customers and employees. In the past year, we spent over $25 million to administer more than 151,000 vaccines, not only to Delta people, but to friends, families, and members of the Georgia community and across the country. As we continue to face challenges presented by COVID, we are committed to maintaining our tradition of excellent customer service. Delta has long run the most reliable operation in the world, and we've maintained that standard in the recovery. And I'd like to be clear on this point. This year, we are exceeding our operational performance compared to 2019 and lead the industry in on-time performance and completion factor. We're in the process of hiring thousands of new Delta people and regrowing our network in a disciplined way that allows us to deliver on our commitments to our people and our customers. The unmatched level of service culminated in the best customer feedback scores we've ever received, earning us the #1 spot on the 2021 J.D. Power North American Airline Satisfaction Study. I would like to once again thank Congress for the invaluable support the payroll support program was to us. To ensure that we're in full compliance with the terms of the PSP agreements, Delta established a PSP and CARES Act Compliance Steering Committee and CARES Act Working Group. These groups, made up of our law, compliance, HR, and finance teams, focused on adhering the PSP requirements to ensure these critical funds were used only for eligible employee wages, salaries, and benefits, could be properly accounted for, and continue to ensure strict compliance with ongoing program restrictions. Together with the extraordinary efforts of our employees, these PSP funds helped us save jobs. As we recover from the pandemic, we will continue to keep the health and safety of our customers and employees our top priority. Thank you again for your support of the airline industry, and more importantly, thank you for your support of our people. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much for being here. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Nelson, thank you for your voice in all of this. It's been a very important one. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, members of the committee. I'm a 25-year union flight attendant, and just 5 years into my career, I witnessed personal and national tragedy with the events of September 11th, 2001. As a Boston-based flight attendant, I lost 9 friends on Flight 175, the day aviation in our country came to a total stop. Within weeks, half of my flight attendant base was furloughed. The federal government response was a $5 billion compensation for direct losses incurred across the whole industry as a result of the ground stop ordered by the government. And I'm quoting from the Air Transportation Stabilization Act of 2001. It also included a loan guarantee program that the White House denied for United Airlines, even after employees agreed to significant concessions as a part of the condition of the loan. The result of insufficient action from the government was a string of bankruptcies across the industry. We were the bailout. Our jobs were cut, our pensions were gutted, those who remained shouldered massive pay cuts and many more hours on the job. Wall Street was ecstatic with the enormous cuts to labor costs. Workers were devastated. Consumers eventually felt the hit too as capacity was cut, seat size shrunk, and pricing became segmented with all kinds of fees. There was no hiring for a long time, but the diminished jobs later made it hard to attract pilots, mechanics, and other aviation careers. So when air travel demand dropped overnight in March of 2020, we refused to follow the old blank check for corporations bailout playbook, especially for airlines. We designed what would later be called the Payroll Support Program and took it to Chairman Peter DeFazio in the House. When the airlines asked him for help, he demanded that they talk to labor first, and that's what they did. American CEO Doug Parker called me on March 18th, and I went to A4A headquarters where all of the CEOs were camped out and frustrated with the response from the days of meetings on the Hill. I was honest with them. I said, the public is mad at you and feeling the sting of inequality on our planes. You're not going to get anything on your own, but if you work with labor and support our Workers First program, we can save the industry. We didn't agree on every provision that night, but the basic terms of the program were set, and the next day we started working together to get it done. Senator Cantwell and Senator Wicker, with your leadership, I cannot thank you enough. In less than a week, the PSP program became a part of the CARES Act, and our jobs were saved. I have to recognize the outstanding leadership of Leader Schumer as well. We kept our health care, our retirement, and kept paying taxes. We didn't stress unemployment lines or need coverage for costly COBRA benefits. The Workers First Relief Program saved millions of ancillary jobs connected to the industry and made it possible to restart our economy. Consumers haven't faced inflation in the cost of airline tickets because we were positioned to meet demand and companies were required to use the funds for payroll. The program helped workers, helped airlines, and helped consumers while capping executive pay, you're welcome, guys, and banning stock buybacks and dividends. For the first time in American history, a relief program told companies exactly how they had to apply the relief, the required service they must maintain for the country, and ensured federal dollars got directly to the people and to the taxpayers. Some have questioned the use of the relief dollars in the wake of operational meltdowns in late summer and fall. This wasn't related to PSP. It was the result of, first, the lapse in PSP funding from October 1st, 2020 to December 28th, 2020, as we warned would happen due to the backlog in retraining, certification, and security credentials that are needed, and airlines planned operation based on pre-pandemic overtime hours, but workers were
Okay, we have been listening to this hearing today in the Senate, the Transportation Committee. Many of the top airlines, head honchos there, testifying, talking about their COVID-19 protocols still, lamenting a worker shortage, especially with pilots, and that has led them to curtail some flight paths and routes in many regional places around the country, many regional airports as well. They're also thanking members of Congress as well for the Paycheck Protection Program and a lot of the taxpayer money that basically kept the airlines afloat during the first couple of months in the early days of the pandemic. We're going to be moving on to some other top headlines on this Wednesday night. I'm Andrew Kraft. Right now, a lot of severe weather happening in America's heartland still, and so quite rare for December. A spate of tornadoes and severe thunderstorms making their way now. We've been tracking this ever since it happened this afternoon. They were in Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa, still over Iowa at the moment, but now working their way north toward Minneapolis and parts of Wisconsin. This is a live look right now in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, this Earth Cam here, and we've been monitoring it for any possible lightning strikes. It looks very, very windy, though. So we're going to have more on this when we come back. We're going to go back out to Fox Weather. We're going to get an update on President Biden's visit as well today to the storm-ravaged areas in Mayfield, Kentucky. So all that and more in just a moment. me live from Mayfield, Kentucky right now is Fox's Stephen Goen. Stephen, how was the president, interacting with affected residents today, and how long was he on the ground?
Andrew, it was about a day-long trip for the president. He's just about to leave the state right now. And what I can tell you was he was shocked. He said he had never laid eyes on storm damage quite like this. But he said he was also amazed at how this community is coming together to help each other through this tough time. The president started his day traveling to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Then he came to Mayfield to tour storm damage here, both in the air and on the ground. While walking through the devastation on the streets here, he shook hands with people who were literally picking up the pieces, and he prayed with local leaders. In a briefing with Governor Andy Beshear and other officials, Biden stressed that the federal government will be lending its help here in the weeks and months to come.
There may be things available that would be helpful 6 weeks, 6 months from now that you're unaware of. And so I've instructed my team to make you all aware of everything that is available from a federal level.
Now, the president also toured storm damage in Dawson Springs, Kentucky. That's a nearby community that was also hit pretty hard. At least 13 people died there. The president has previously declared a major disaster declaration for the area. In western Kentucky, 8 counties are a part of that. It's going to free up those much needed federal funds. Today, the president noting that weather events in the U.S. this year may have cost more than $99 billion, and these tornadoes this past weekend are only adding to that cost. Now, FEMA has its resources deployed here as part of a federal effort. Generators, food, and water have been provided. 500 National Guard troops have also been deployed here on the ground to help in these recovery efforts, and they will be lasting a long time. Andrew.
Stephen, thanks so much for that update. You've been on the ground for so long there, kind of surveying as well, reporting from down there. Give us a sense, now we're almost a week later from these really affected areas that have to go through this severe weather. What's it like there on the ground? Have you talked to people? Are they still picking up the pieces?
They're still picking up the pieces, and they will be for some time now, but I can tell you from when we first got here, and you really couldn't even drive on the roads after those first few days after the tornadoes. Now things are starting to improve. Things have been swept to the side. We've seen a lot of heavy machinery here, picking up all those broken pieces of houses and bricks and wires and taking them and putting them into trucks and hauling all of that away. But there's still so much of it here. When it comes to the people that we've spoken to, so many say they are just lucky to be alive, even though they don't have maybe their livelihood, they don't have their homes anymore. They say they were lucky to walk away maybe uninjured, although they know so many people who are still missing and so many people who have died. So there is hope in this community, but it is mixed with a lot of sorrow and heartache, obviously, from what has happened here. Andrew.
All right, Fox's Stephen Goen there live for us in Mayfield, Kentucky. We appreciate your reporting, Stephen, and we'll talk to you again.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, right now, in addition to those areas that are cleaning up from storms over the weekend, there are new tornado warnings right now in parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. This is the same spate of storms and this same system that was moving this afternoon through parts of Kansas and Nebraska, now upwards towards northeastern Iowa and up now in Minnesota and Wisconsin. We're going to be following all of this. We're going to go out now to Fox Weather, and they've been covering all of this. So we're going to listen in to see what are the updates as so many in the Midwest now having to undergo these storms. We have a live look still right now out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and the camera shaking because it is so windy. Don't really see much lightning, but let's hear now from the Fox Weather meteorologists.
Damaging and potentially deadly depending on if you're outside, if you're
you're an area where maybe it is able to take down a tree or take down a siding of a roof or a home, all things that have been associated with this, as well as some actual power poles that have been knocked down because of these winds. Here's a look at some of the warnings again. We pushed out of Iowa with these tornado warnings. We moved into Minnesota. We pushed into Wisconsin now, and we're continuing to follow it as it heads up into the upper Midwest, upper Great Lakes region. Take it a little bit further south. You still have severe weather here. Don't want to underestimate that either, but you are talking about still some severe weather warnings that have been issued. Yeah, it is weakening actually quite a bit. Thank you, Cody. So as we've been continuing to move further south, you still have some so it's weakening in the sense that noticing you're getting a little bit more gaps and space in between some of these cells, but it's still being associated with some strong winds as it continues to kind of push its way through. And Nick mentioned earlier some of the record warmth that we had for parts of the plains from Nebraska up through Wisconsin, Minnesota, from snow on the ground even just 2 days ago and this morning to record warmth near 70. You have that surge of air coming up from the Gulf of Mexico. It is a more humid, a warmer air mass, and then you have drier air moving in behind it and cooler air as well, still triggering some strong storms. So you get that convective wind associated with many of these. This is that severe thunderstorm warning as we take it down to Oklahoma. As far south as Oklahoma, you're still looking at severe thunderstorms here. The county would be Nowata County till 9 p.m. local time, so about another 20 minutes with that. Severe weather, so when we talk about severe thunderstorms, while we're not seeing rotation now, it's a possibility as you continue to follow these cells pushing eastward. It's something that's associated in a possibility with severe weather, but we have no active tornado warnings, meaning we don't have any rotation that's popping up on the radar. And at this point, no reason to issue those from the National Weather Service. But again, from Oklahoma, cutting up through Missouri, out of the southern portion there, that little southern corner of Kansas, and then all the way up through Iowa and through Minneapolis, you're still noticing some stormy conditions and some very strong winds. Can't reiterate that point enough. The biggest hazard outside of the tornadoes has been the winds, and you have wind damage really across the plains, and we even were able to see it take over a semi-truck and knock it over when it was driving along I-80 in Nebraska. Here's a look at those tornado warnings again. This is the most active and most dangerous situation heading towards Eau Claire in through Minnesota, and Wisconsin. I'll go ahead and send it over to Nick, also checking in on this latest round of tornado warnings here.
Thank you, Marissa. Great information you just provided us with there. And we want to go ahead and let you know what's going on with some damage reports, okay? So there's obviously been many damage reports all across several states. And let's go ahead and show you what exactly we've seen just over the last 3 hours here. So looks like we are going to start in Minnesota here, where Alden has seen power poles down with time estimated based on radar. And we've also got the city of Bluffton with multiple trees down there. And you can just see, again, all those icons mean that there has been some sort of an imprint from the storms in that area, whether it's a wind damage report, a tree down, power line, hail, even a tornado touchdown. As we get down into Iowa here, and again, Iowa's really seeing a lot of activity here this evening. Look at all this. Cheney there, a tree down over Highway 150. That's actually fairly close to, it looks like I-80 there. Also in Windsor Heights, which is right around Des Moines. Des Moines saw some severe storms roll through right around the 7 o'clock hour. Large tree down on a house in Clive, and that time was estimated from the radar as well. Plattsburgh, large tree down, and this is in Kansas here. It's blocking Highway 116 west. West of Plattsburgh. You know what? We're in Missouri there. So Plattsburgh, Missouri is where that large tree is down. And then now into Kansas, where there's a tree, unfortunately, on a house near 83rd and Corliss Road. So that's what you don't want to hear with these storms, right? You hate to hear that property has been compromised or damaged, and unfortunately, maybe, whenever you have the damage to property, you always have to think, I hope everybody's okay. I hope there were no injuries or, God forbid, fatalities here. This is in Kansas still. Sycamore, 3-inch tree limbs broken, power poles broken, and that is likely due to high winds. Humboldt there, lots of trees down between Iola and Humboldt in the 1100 block there. Looks like the winds there estimated to be between 60 and 70 miles per hour. And we've seen so much of that, 60, 70 mile per hour winds are almost like a drop in the bucket across many, many states. Matter of fact, we've actually seen non-thunderstorm related wind gusts of over 100 miles per hour. So that just goes to show you that the wind threat was already there. That's exactly the graphic that I was just kind of referring to. Lamar, Colorado, 107 mile per hour wind. Red River, New Mexico, as far south and west as New Mexico, 103. That's why they were dealing with dust storm conditions there. Right at 101, as you look towards Manitow Springs, Colorado, AF Academy, Colorado, right at the century mark. Same with Russell, Kansas, Smith Center, Kansas, 97. Cadell, Kansas, 95. And, you know, there's many, many more reports even further down and around across the plains where we saw 90 and 80 and 70 mile per hour winds. So that has certainly been the common theme, right? So the calling card really of this outbreak is obviously the gusty wind, but of course we've also got some tornadic activity, some hail, and heavy rain rates as well. At one point in Iowa, we had a rain rate of 8 inches per hour. So this system here is really, unfortunately, kind of firing on all cylinders. It's got every single component that can really create chaos quickly. The one thing that would be maybe a silver lining is the fact that it's fast moving, which is terrible.
All right, so we just wanted to show you some of our Fox weather coverage, and they do such a great job there as they've been tracking all of these severe storms moving through the plains and in the Midwest. We have our XRAD radar system as well to show you just how massive this storm system is there. It's now the majority of it, the most severe areas are over the Minneapolis area, Sioux Falls still, also Cedar Rapids in Iowa. We still have our Earth Cam there outside of Cedar Rapids. You can see the wind and the rain shaking that camera. I know you can't really see much. So we just wanted to give you a weather update. If we get any more details or any more tornadoes touch down there, we will bring that to you here on Live Now from Fox on this Wednesday night. I'm Andrew Kraft. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll be touching on some of these political headlines today. It looks like the Build Back Better Act could be pushed till next year. So more on that in just a moment. Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. We just got this live picture. This is in the Minneapolis area. You can see it's pretty rainy there as we continue to follow all of this severe weather in the Midwest, now affecting parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota as well. Fox Weather is reporting that there are tornado warnings in effect for parts of Wisconsin there. So we'll continue to monitor that right now, but we want to get to some of these major political headlines from today. We're going to hear from Fox News correspondent Mike Emanuel with the latest on what is happening with the Build Back Better Act. It looks like Senate Democrats want to prioritize voting rights over the Build Back Better Act as we go into next year, a midterm year. Here's that report.
What kind of progress?
President Biden voiced optimism Wednesday, telling reporters he's hopeful his climate and social spending proposal will still pass before the end of the year. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi thinks it can be done even sooner.
We're hoping that we can have this settled before Christmas.
But it's not a done deal yet, despite Congress reaching consensus on raising the debt ceiling, the president's infrastructure bill, and today's final vote to pass a new defense budget.
The motion to concur is agreed to.
Republicans say the nearly $2 trillion price tag is too much and risks raising inflation even higher.
Every single day brings new evidence our Democratic colleagues should give the country a break.
The debate is only further fueled by today's movement at the Federal Reserve, announcing 3 interest rate hikes to combat inflation in 2022.
Overall inflation is running well above our 2% longer run goal and will likely continue to do so well into next year.
Another hurdle, sign off by the Senate's parliamentarian.
We haven't even gotten anything back from the parliamentarian, so just procedurally, we don't have to vote on it.
Moderate Democrat Joe Manchin, who remains a holdout, says he's still talking with the president.
The members of the caucus have made it clear to the leader that we should stay through the weekend if necessary, rather than jeopardize time with our family at Christmas.
If nothing is passed, today marks the final payout for the monthly child tax payments. In Washington, Mike Emanuel, Fox News.
Mike, thanks for that update there. So it does really hinge on what Joe Manchin wants to do. He's indicated that the Build Back Better Act is just not ready. They have lots to agree on still, not just Republicans and Democrats, but members of the own Democratic caucus. So right now, let's hear from Fox News Capitol Hill correspondent Chad Pergram on all this as well.
The best laid plans of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer may have gone astray.
We aim to pass it before Christmas. Senate Democrats continue our work to pass the President's Build Back Better Act before Christmas. My goal is to have the Senate take action to debate and pass the President's Build Back Better legislation before we hit Christmas Day.
Senate Democrats remain upbeat that the Senate can still pass the bill before December 25th.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Let's go home to our families. Let's get our job done.
But those hopes are dimming.
Nothing close.
Unresolved issues linger on immigration, taxes, and health care.
The best Christmas present the American people could hear was that this bill was going nowhere.
Republicans oppose the bill, but it hinges on a solitary Democratic senator.
Seems to me Senator Manchin can determine the timing here.
Joe Manchin talked with President Biden multiple times this week. Manchin worries the bill could fuel inflation. Manchin is elusive since the bill isn't done.
Can your issues be resolved before Christmas?
Procedurally, we don't have nothing to vote on.
There's nothing magical about passing the bill by Christmas. It's an artificial deadline to prompt action. But unlike wine, this bill may not get better with time, especially as President Biden's polls sag.
It's going to be hard to keep Democrats in line as his unpopularity grows. Anything that slows down the train risks running it off the rails.
Most Democrats wanted this bill approved yesterday, and there's a whispered concern in the 50-50 Senate. It doesn't take much for Democrats to suddenly lose their majority or to have a health issue sideline a member. On Capitol Hill, Chad Pergram, Fox News.
Chad, thanks so much for that update. A lot of news happening on the January 6th House Select Committee investigating the Capitol riot. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary since that fateful day in American history just in January. So let's hear what's been going on with the committee. Remember, just yesterday, the full House voted to recommend contempt charges of Congress for former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
The congressional investigation into the January 6th attacks targets several associates of former President Donald Trump, though some key witnesses say they are refusing to testify.
Fearing the truth is not an excuse for not honoring a subpoena of this Congress.
After voting to hold former President Trump's White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, in contempt of Congress last night, members of the January 6th committee are turning their attention to Jeffrey Clark. He's a former Trump Justice Department official who tried to help the president overturn his 2020 election loss. Clark is evading congressional subpoenas and vows to invoke his Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination, like other witnesses.
History will not look upon any of you as martyrs. History will not look upon you as a victim.
Republicans are accusing Democrats of abusing their power.
They don't care about fairness or due process.
Though another Republican, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, says he's eager to hear the committee's findings.
We're all watching, as you are, what is unfolding on the House side, and it will be interesting to reveal all the participants who were involved.
If the committee votes to hold Clark in contempt, it'll refer the issue to federal prosecutors. In Washington, Rich Edson, Fox News.
Rich, thanks so much for that. Right now, let's hear from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi talking about not only the January 6th committee, but also the Build Back Better Act and what's going to happen if it's going to move anywhere before Christmas or into next year.
Good morning. Well, last evening we had two very sad moments of silence yesterday for 800,000 people who have died from COVID. We had a moment of silence on the floor of the House, but also on the steps of the Capitol in bipartisan House and Senate remembrance of those who lost their lives. Our thoughts and prayers are with their families and those who have lost their livelihoods as well. But the deaths are so very, very sad. It's so hard to comprehend. 800,000 people. And the number continues to grow. But we continue to be optimistic about the effectiveness of the vaccines, the awareness that some people are coming to that they need to be vaccinated. They need to be vaccinated. Then we also had the moment of silence for those who were affected by the storms. I was very moved by Representative Comer, who represents Western Kentucky, as he spoke, calling for a moment of silence about those who lost their lives. I talked to him after, and he was going to be traveling with the president today. So far, they're pleased, who can be pleased, but have received the federal response that is necessary, and talked to my former chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Rogers. He knows what we can do, and I'm sure that if there's more that Congress needs to do, he will inform us of that. He told me that the storm, it was a mile wide. The phenomenon was a mile wide and with such force. So very sad. Yesterday was a busy day for us legislatively. As you know, we passed a resolution against racism in our society, in establishing a special counsel at the Department of State to fight Islamophobia, talking about the numbers of incidents against Muslims in our country. In terms of anti-Muslim sentiments, we also passed the Uyghur bill, which calls about China to end what they are doing there. I mean, that's genocide. It's genocide in China. The interest, though, in it across our country is about the human rights aspect of it, but also the forced labor piece of it. When the President Xi brings these people into these forced labor camps and the rest, separating them from their families and taking other drastic actions, he is also engaging them in forced labor. And that is something that we cannot have our businesses compete with. So from a moral standpoint, a value standpoint, the legislation was very important. And from a trade standpoint, essential as well. The big event for us yesterday, of course, was the debt limit, to lift the debt limit. It's just always so interesting to me that the Republicans vote against lifting the ceiling on the debt limit. It is something that threatens the financial security of our country, gambles with the personal financial security of families, and again, the health of our economy as well as its impact globally. It's one thing to say, well, we'll have a few votes against it to make a statement. It's another thing to say we shouldn't be doing it. And that's what they did yesterday. And just so people know how it affects them, of course, it has a big impact. Millions of jobs lost, trillions of dollars of household wealth down the drain. And again, the cost to you if you have a car loan, a credit card bill, a school loan, any interest that you're paying on a loan will be increased if, in fact, we did not lift the debt ceiling. As the Constitution says, the full faith and credit of the United States should not be questioned. But in addition to that, even the discussion of it a few years ago lowered the interest rate, our credit rating, the United States credit rating, and that was not a good thing for our economy. We should not be flirting with danger when it comes to our economy, whether it's our national economy or global economy or the personal financial well-being of America's working families. I want to commend, going back to the Uyghurs for a moment, Chairman not George McGovern. He gets confused with George McGovern on the food security issues, but Jim McGovern really a patron saint to us in terms of fighting for human rights throughout the world. And this Uyghur bill on forced labor was his legislation yesterday. I neglected to mention that when I talked about that. And so now we are just trying to see how soon we can pass the Build Back Better legislation. So important. It's fraught with meaning at this time because on today, the 15th of December, would be the last Biden child tax credit check that would go out. We're hoping that we can have this settled before Christmas because on December 31st, this expires. And so it's essential. What we see in terms of the child tax credit has been used more recently for preparing children for school. It's been used for food, for rent. It's essentials that the child tax credit has been used. 60 million children benefit, a large number of them off of poverty, coming out of poverty because of the child tax credit. So for this and other reasons, everything to do with children, child care, universal pre-K, affordable, making child care affordable. I guess the best two words to use, Build Back Better. I mean, I've said it's transformative and all that, but the best two words to use are it lowers cost. It lowers cost of child care. It lowers cost of health care. It lowers cost of food. It lowers cost in so many ways that are essential to America's working families. The very issues that people struggle over the kitchen table to figure out how we're going to pay the bills. The very issues, very frightening things that people have trying to go to sleep at night. How are we going to pay the bills? Well, Build Back Better helps you to do that. We love the fact that it's Build Back Better with women, Build Back Better for the children, Build Back Better for the planet, lowering energy costs. Again, it lowers costs. So hopefully the Senate will deal with that and send that to us. And of course, we're also hopeful that they will send us bills to protect our democracy, that respects the sanctity of the vote, that keeps us a democracy. So we're prepared to come back as soon as the Senate is ready to send us these bills. And it is, it's pretty exciting. The enthusiasm that is out there for the president's package, his vision for our country, building the infrastructure in a bipartisan bill to do that. All of us, many of us are having our town meetings, our public events in our own regions, and the response has just been so optimistic about how these resources to build the infrastructure in a way that brings equity, fairness, justice to it all, in a green way that protects the environment, and that, again, creates good-paying union jobs, jobs that, again, protect the planet as we promote jobs, as we move commerce, as we get people safely to and from school and work without staying in the cars a long time, so it improves the quality of life. So that's for the infrastructure bill. The Build Back Better enhances all of that. So we're very eager, very proud of that work. I think that there's an agreement that can be made, and I look forward to working to pass that on the House side. So that's kind of what we have going here. Oh, did I talk about Steph Curry? I talk about Steph Curry just in the first, the Warriors colors. First, just coincidentally, the first few minutes, I was not by myself. One other member, Mr. Payne, and I were in the cloakroom with Ella and well, the women for whom I bought a hot dog to watch the game, just the two of us there. First few minutes, boom, settled. Tied. A few minutes later, break the record. With such dignity, with such poise, with such discipline, with such excellence. And then I had to go to work and then came back to see the ending and to see Miller and Jones, to see the other two leaders in that field be there with their shirts. Oh, I don't have my phone, but I have the picture on my phone of them, and then them giving Steph the shirt with his number on it. I think we'll get to 3,000 pretty soon, but no pressure. Let's just win the games. But it was pretty exciting, I have to say. And to see the enthusiasm of the crowd for that achievement. Whether the Knicks fans were excited about the game, I don't know. But there was great enthusiasm for Steph Curry. And so we're very, very, very proud of him. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah. What do you got?
Madam Speaker, Insider just completed a 5-month investigation finding that 49 members of Congress and 182 senior congressional staffers have violated the Stock Act, the insider trading law. I'm wondering if you have any reaction to that, and secondly, should members of Congress and their spouses be banned from trading individual stocks while serving in Congress?
No, I don't know to the second one. We have a responsibility to report in the stock, on the stock, but I'm not familiar with that 5-month review, but if people aren't reporting, they should be. Because this is a free market and we are a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that. Yes, ma'am.
Madam Speaker, you talked about voting rights. We know Senator Warnock yesterday expressed that he would like to see the Senate stay in as...
I'm sorry, who did?
Senator Warnock on the Senate side talked about voting rights yesterday, staying here through the holidays to get it done, and really pressuring the White House and Senator Manchin to push for maybe a similar carve-out as we saw for the debt ceiling. Do you share that sentiment, and do you think that there needs to be more sense of urgency?
Senator Warnock's statement yesterday was, I just didn't hear what you said, was a beautiful patriotic statement about our country. He has been an inspiration all his life, and now as a member of the Senate. So I completely am inspired by and agree with what he said. I don't know, I've said I don't I don't participate that much in the Senate rules discussions, but I do know that there are 3 members of the Supreme Court whom Senator Mitch McConnell got there with a simple majority by taking exception to the filibuster. So if those 3 people can have a job for life affecting the lives of the American people, I don't see why we couldn't have legislation that stops the voter suppression, making it harder for people to vote, and also now to end the election nullification. Probably, I mean, with stiff competition within their initiatives across the country for the worst, stiff competition for the worst, the election nullification is one that has attracted a good deal of attention, because if you're just going to say we'll have elections and 3 people that we decide who they are going to decide what those numbers are, then you have destroyed our democracy. So I would hope that we can make progress in a bipartisan way. I don't know why the sanctity of the vote, the fundamental principle of our democracy, is not as important to Republicans as it is to Democrats. And I support what Senator Warnock was suggesting.
Madam Speaker. Democrats, of course, had hoped that the Build Back Better bill would have passed months ago. Here we are 10 days before Christmas. It's possible, very likely, that it could get punted into 2022. If you miscalculate the resistance from Joe Manchin, even though he detailed where he was months ago with that paper that he gave?
No, I think that this is called the legislative process. And we have our rules, and they have their rules. And I'm still hopeful that it will pass. I'm not going to have a post-mortem on something that hasn't died. I think that I think we will have the legislation and it will pass. I hope the sooner the better, especially since we have certain deadlines. And I respect the process, and I respect Senator Manchin.
Good morning, thank you. The mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, expressed concern about crime, said it's time for the reign of criminals to end. What do you think about some of this crime, specifically in San Francisco, smash and grabs, and also generally, is there some sort of a federal response? You know, we passed crime bills here before. Is there something looking at some of these problems?
Well, specifically to what is happening not just in San Francisco, but in other parts of the country. In fact, Retail Association of the whole country and leaders in business across the country have asked for a remedy, and we do have one as we are preparing the CHIPS bill, for lack of another, you know what I mean when I say the CHIPS bill. The CHIPS bill is about chips, it's about supply chain, and it's about research. And we're very close to our own agreement in the House on that. Within that bill, the Energy and Commerce Committee has something called INFORM, all caps, and that is legislation that would require those who are selling online especially to establish their legitimacy as to where these products came from, because what people do is they steal things and sell them online. They have to establish their legitimacy if they're going to be sold online. And then in addition to that, that's Energy and Commerce. The Judiciary Committee has a bill, Safe Shopping, which it addresses the same problem in a little bit of a different way in terms of though holding platforms accountable and those selling things accountable for the provenance of those goods. And it is, out of the question that people should be able to think that they can just steal things, profit from them, and not have any accountability on it. So those two things, some combination of those two things, both of them are going to be in the bill. How they come together. We're working with the Senate to pass that legislation, and that's completely in the works.
Do you have any problems specifically about what the mayor said about some of the issues specific to San Francisco, some of the retailers leaving there as well?
Well, it is. It's absolutely outrageous. Obviously, it cannot continue. But the fact is that there is an attitude of lawlessness in our country that springs from I don't know where. Maybe you do. And we cannot have that lawlessness become the norm. And these people have, they coordinate with each other and they plan traffic patterns and the rest so that they can reach their goal and depart very quickly. And some of it is, again, high-level stores, as the retailers have told us, and some of it is your local Walgreens. But none of it is acceptable. And again, it has to be stopped. And again, showing that people are not being able to profit from that. This isn't like somebody stealing something to go home because they don't have the money to buy. This is about stealing for profit. They have to prove where it came from. It's outrageous, and it must. I agree with the mayor. It must be stopped. But it's not just San Francisco. It's in our entire country, and that's evidenced by the appeal we are receiving from across the country for the legislation. So I hope that will be soon, and for many reasons, including the provenance of the goods. Yes, ma'am.
Madam Speaker, looking ahead to January 6th, because we may not get an opportunity to talk to you again before then.
I'll probably be here tomorrow and next week. Are you not going to be around?
We'll see.
Is this your goodbye?
But in the event it's not, I wanted to, we heard from the Inspector General for the Capitol Police last week that a lot of the recommendations are still open to better that department. Coming up on a year since January 6th, how do you feel about the level of change at that agency, the security here at the Capitol, and the security of your members as they hope to spend their holidays at home?
Well, I thank you for the question. It is my hope that this is not our last meeting. We still have to deal with the sanctity of the vote and protecting our democracy. We still have to lower costs for the American people by passing BBB. And so hopefully we'll see you next week. But in terms of that, I know the Capitol is much safer than it was a year ago. We will have a report as we prepare for January 6th in terms of the different categories, the strength and morale of the police force, the physical structure that coming from the architect of the Capitol, and so much of what is happening here is not so much about security as it's about COVID, and so we want to be able to open the Capitol. Of course, we can't do that without the consent of the Capitol physician, and he knows of our interest and how he thinks we could do that soon. So the fact that we don't have as many tours and all the rest is not necessarily a security issue. It's a COVID issue. But this is a horizon. We are always working to do better with security, and we do have those conversations are ongoing, and we'll have some accounting of it before the January 6th date.
Madam Speaker, on the CHIPS Act.
If Democrats don't get Build Back Better finished soon, would you consider a standalone piece of legislation just for the child tax credit? Because you have a deadline where the IRS won't be able to send out January's payment on time this month.
Well, it's going to be going out today, this month.
January's payment.
You said this month.
They have said that they need it done by the 28th in order to make the change.
It's just a question of what, of course, we could pass that in the House. Whether we could pass it in the Senate remains to be seen. But I don't want to let anybody off the hook on the BBB to say, well, we covered that one thing, so now the pressure is off. I think that is really important leverage in the discussion on BBB, that the children and their families will suffer without that payment. Not everybody gets it on a monthly basis, but those who need it the most do. And so we're just still optimistic about BBB passing, and perhaps even if it were after the first of the year, which I hope it is not, that it could be retroactive if it's early enough in the first of the year. Thank you all very much. As I said to my colleagues last night, I hope I see you next week. But if I don't, Merry everything, Merry Christmas, Happy belated Hanukkah, Merry everything, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays. But we really are hoping very much to be back here next week. And by then, Steph will be close to 3,000. 3,000. I have to say, when I announced it to my colleagues, Some were very excited, and others were like, the Knicks lost? Lighten up, Knicks. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
All right, Speaker Pelosi there saying that she's not quite sure if they'll be back in session next week because that all depends on what the Senate is going to do with Build Back Better. Remember, it's already passed in the House, but many senators indicating today, especially in the Democratic caucus, they just don't know if it's going to happen this year. So that's going to do it for our political headlines for now. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but major moves in the New York City Police Department. The mayor-elect, Eric Adams, announcing who he wants to be the next chief of the NYPD. We'll have that in just a moment.
Here to Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Mike Page, as we continue to bring you top stories and headlines from all over the country. Next story, we're going to go out to New York City, where it was a big day for the New York City Police Department as they have a new milestone right now. And to tell us all about it right now, let's go out to Fox 5 New York's Antoine Lewis with the very latest. Antoine.
A very new milestone to tell you about. Now, just to give you some landscape here, we're coming to you from Long Island City, Queens, which you're familiar with the city structure. It's one of the boroughs outside surrounding Manhattan. But as we are talking about today, the New York City mayor-elect named a police commissioner-elect, if you will, of appointee. She'll take the job on January 1st. She, that is the key word, because she is the first female police commissioner in the history of the NYPD.
In this city, in this moment, I have come full circle. And it is with a humble heart and clear eyes about the tasks and challenges ahead that I accept the position of New York City Police Commissioner.
And Keishant Sewell will make history as the first female New York City Police Commissioner once Mayor-elect Eric Adams' administration takes office next month. Adams making good on a campaign promise to name a woman as the city's top cop.
We have witnessed so many women who have conducted themselves in a professional way, yet never received the opportunity to do the job on a higher level. That is stopping today.
Sewell spent nearly 25 years with the Nassau County Police Department, beginning as a patrol officer, eventually working her way up to chief of detectives. And she inherits some very serious challenges. Sewell will try to reduce increases in violence on city subways and on city streets. Both she and Adams went to Flatbush, Brooklyn Wednesday, where police were still investigating the shooting death of a 20-year-old deli worker killed Tuesday night.
We cannot build bridges with clenched fists. Open hands allow us to shape.
Absolutely unacceptable. I don't want to speak to the actual incident that happened here because that is in the hands of the investigators at this time. When we get on board and we can take a look, some fresh eyes on what's going on here, we hope to be able to answer the problems that are happening.
Adams introduced Sewell from Queensbridge houses in Long Island City Wednesday morning, which is where the new police commissioner is from. And residents like Mary Rivers, who's lived in the houses for 40 years, hopes that background will translate to effective leadership.
What do you hope she brings to the table, being that she grew up here, you know?
There's a lot of things she can bring to the table, that if she brings it.
We are at a pivotal moment in New York as our city faces the twin challenges of public safety and police accountability. They are not mutually exclusive.
And as you come back to us, again, the first female and the third African-American to hold the title of police commissioner, following in the footsteps of Benjamin Ward in the 1980s and Lee Brown in the 1990s.
All right, Antoine Lewis reporting live for us from Fox 5 New York. Thank you so much for this insight as well as this update. We appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, and that was my colleague Mike Page there, speaking with our great Fox 5 New York reporter Antoine Lewis about this really historic announcement today by the mayor-elect of New York City, Eric Adams. He'll be sworn in as mayor on January 1st. He's announcing, like we have just been saying, who he wants to lead the New York Police Department. Let's just listen to some of that announcement from earlier today in Queens.
This is an amazing moment, and you know, quantum physics talks about when you acknowledge the existence of something, it becomes apparent to you. And we have had so much talent in plain sight. But the reality is that we have never acknowledged the existence of it. We never acknowledged the existence of crisis management teams and what Kay Bain and Tony Herbert and others are doing. We never acknowledged the diversification of our city councils like they should be, like our new city council elect, Julie Wan, who's here. We never acknowledged the existence of the failures that have taken place. And if you don't acknowledge it, you begin to normalize it, and you begin to expect so little. And we never acknowledge the ability of real leadership within the rank and file of law enforcement and those who happen to be women but were able to provide and do the job. Those women have held it down. As we walked in, we saw a captain that's here. We have witnessed so many women who have conducted themselves in a professional way, yet never received the opportunity to do the job on a higher level. Always sitting on the bench, never allowed to get in the game. That is stopping today. That is stopping today. I made it clear on the campaign trail. I am going to find a woman police commissioner. And I was not going to lower my standards. I gave my team a difficult task of finding someone with the qualification, the abilities, understand policing, was on the ground, and something you hear me saying over and over again, emotionally intelligent. Don't tell me about academics, don't tell me about Ivy League schools, don't tell me about how many credentials you have. How are you as a human being? Tell me about your emotional intelligence. A term we don't use often. That is the criteria to serve in an Eric Adams administration. You must not just be academically intelligent, you must be emotionally intelligent. And this is a personification of emotional intelligence this amazing future police commissioner standing here today. And so I want to thank my brother K. Bain, the number of lives that he has saved right there in that corner space, committed to be on the ground with the unprecedented coordination with the district attorney here in Queens of taking down major gangs, and his on the ground speaking with people. They had an entire year with no murders. Entire year with no murders. Saving lives. This crisis management system is a real win, but we're not covering all the hot spots. We need to give them the resources they need so that they can do what they're doing in a real way. And I want to commit to the incredible success that K. Bain and other crisis management teams have put together, and the commitment and dedication like people like Dr. Divine Pryor and his long work of helping people turn their lives around, having me sit down with gang members to find out how we get them out of gangs. This was the architect of doing that, and people didn't understand what we were doing. Dr. Pryor, we had some people say, what were we doing, sit down with gang members? I used to say, what am I doing, sit down with you? Exactly. And then Bishop Taylor. His dad had a church here, workforce development, giving people resources, building out the entire conversation around banking, having a credit union in this community, showing people what the possibilities are. These are great partners that we have had for so many years. And so I'm proud today not only to
Okay, so we just wanted to show you just a little bit of that announcement being made today by the mayor-elect of New York City, Eric Adams, announcing who he wants to be for his next NYPD commissioner. A historic first, the first black female there, Kenshin Sewell. So we'll be following all of that. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we're going to hear from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He's talking about critical race theory being taught in schools. All of that and more in just a moment.
We've been able to get requirements back into the high schools, which is very important. We have the ability, and we'll be doing exams when people leave school, which will be like a citizenship exam that naturalized immigrants have to take, because at the end of the day, everybody that comes through our school system some will go into a variety of different fields, but everyone's going to be an American citizen, and they're going to have duties and responsibilities, and they need to understand what that means, and they need to understand the principles that our country was founded upon. We also have been able to help teachers. We just launched, and it's going to come into effect next year, the civics, we call it like a civics training program, where if you go through it, really get deep knowledge and understanding on the fundamentals, you get a $3,000 bonus. And so that's something that we think is very, very positive. So we want all our students to understand, why was our country founded? What were some of the key ideas that made us different? I mean, for example, our founding fathers said that we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. The rights do not come from government. So these are natural rights, and we create a constitutional system not to give us rights, but to protect the rights that we already have. And we have a constitutional system that's laid out, and not just having a judiciary, an executive, a legislature, but also having 50 state governments and federalism and all these different things that are designed to be able to maintain and preserve a free society. And we've seen those ideas tested over the years throughout our history, and you've had different people with different views about it. I mean, if you look at President Lincoln, when before he became president, running for the Senate, he was running against a guy named Stephen Douglas, and Douglas was basically saying that, the founders, wanted slavery, it was important to have, and all of a sudden Lincoln said, no, that wasn't what they wanted. They disfavored it. They wanted it to go away. They created the Declaration of Independence to say everybody had rights. And so Lincoln prevailed ultimately in that debate once he became elected president. And then you look at what people in our country have done, defeating Nazism in World War II, when the world really hung in the balance. And that was America that did it. And they did it because they believed in having a free society. You think about what MLK stood for. He said he didn't want people judged on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. You listen to some of these people nowadays, they don't talk about that. And then more recently, it was the United States that was able to win the Cold War and defeat Soviet communism. Now, I think that there's more of these people coming out of the woodwork than we ever thought nowadays, which is unfortunate. And there's a lot of problems with Marxism in our hemisphere, and we see what's going on with authoritarian countries like China. But nevertheless, people thought that we wouldn't be able to beat the Soviet Union, and we did it. And so these are really important things that people need to have a great understanding of. And I think what you see now with the rise of this woke ideology is an attempt to really delegitimize our history and to delegitimize our institutions. And I view the wokeness as a form of cultural Marxism. They want to tear... They want to just, it's not just, people will say, oh, they're leftists or socialists. It's not just like taxes and all that. Yeah, they do want that, and that's not good. But they really want to tear at the fabric of our society and our culture and things that really we've taken for granted, like the ability of parents to direct the upbringing of their kids. So this is really, really significant. And when you see these things throughout the country, where they take down Thomas Jefferson's statue in New York City, where they take down Abraham Lincoln in Massachusetts, where they take George Washington's name off schools in California, that is an attempt to erase history. They want to delegitimize the founding of the country and the institutions, and they basically want to replace it with a very militant form of leftism that would absolutely destroy this country if that ever took hold. And so we have a responsibility to stand for the truth, to stand for what's right, and we're doing that, and we've put more resources and emphasis on teaching civics, on teaching people about American history. But we also have to protect people and protect our kids from some very pernicious ideologies that are trying to be forced upon them all across the country. So earlier this year, I directed the Florida Department of Education to prohibit critical race theory in our K-12 schools. And you know, you'll hear these people, it's, you know, they made it, it was a big deal in Virginia, these counties, parents were really upset, and then a lot of the media would be like, oh, it's not happening, and they would basically act like this is all just made up. Well, let me show you some of the things that have been done throughout our country just in the last couple years. The Arizona Department of Education created a, quote, equity toolkit, claiming that babies show the first sign of racism at 3 months old, and that white children become full racists, quote, strongly biased in favor of whiteness by age 5. Santa Clara County Office of Education denounced the United States as a, quote, parasitic system based on, quote, the invasion of, quote, white male settlers, and encouraged teachers to cash in on kids' inherent empathy in order to recruit them into political activism. And a Philadelphia elementary school forced 5th graders to celebrate black communism and simulated a black power rally to, quote, free Angela Davis from prison. And at that particular school, 87% of students fail to achieve basic literacy by graduation. And so this is something that you see all across the country, and we have a responsibility in Florida to say we're not going to do it. So we did do that. So it violates Florida standards to scapegoat someone based on their race, to say that, you know, they're inherently racist, to say that they're an oppressor or oppressed or any of that. And that's good and that's important. But we also have to realize that we got to do more to make sure that that actually carries the day in the classrooms and in our society. So today we are going to be introducing to the public, and we have legislators who are going to help us with this, a new piece of legislation for the upcoming legislative session called Stop Wrongs Against Our Kids and Employees Act, the Stop Woke Act. And it's something that and this will do a number of things that are very important. One, it will put into statute the Department of Education's prohibition on CRT in K through 12 schools. No taxpayer dollars should be used to teach our kids to hate our country or to hate each other. And that's important, and that's all well and good, but I think what we've seen recently is you can legislate things like Parents' Bill of Rights. You can have certain things, and sometimes the school districts don't always follow it. And so we are going to be including in this legislation giving parents a private right of action to be able to enforce the prohibition on CRT, and they get to recover attorney's fees when they prevail, which is very important. And yes, there will be a fortified ability for the State Department of Education to hold people accountable, but honestly, the parents know best what's going on, and they're in the best position to be able to do it. And here's the thing, a lot of times these people will fear lawsuits more than a fine from the State Department of Education, because when you do a lawsuit, you get discovery, and you're subject to that. And when they say they're not doing CRT, and then you have all this information showing that they are doing it, it really is an uncomfortable position for them. So I think that gives parents the ability to go in and ensure that our state standards are being followed, and I think it's something that needs to be done. We also need to understand that this has become a cottage industry, this CRT. There's people making huge amounts of money. They basically will get tens of thousands of dollars to go in and do a training, sometimes at schools, sometimes at businesses, you know, basically saying like, okay, pay me $50,000 so I can teach your employees how racist capitalism is, or something like that. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, you're certainly charging a king's ransom to do that. You don't complain about capitalism when you're lining your own pocket. It's just when other people are doing well. But the issue is you have these whole cottage industry of these consultants that will come, and they'll go into a school district, or they'll go to a business, and they'll go to colleges and universities, and they bring a lot of this into those institutions, and they call it equity. Just understand, when you hear equity used, that is just an ability for people to smuggle in their ideology. Because we don't need to have these terms. We have society based on equality, where you're treated equally regardless of your upbringing, regardless of your race. You have the same rights and privileges as anybody else. Equity is used to put the thumb on the scale in favor of their ideology. And so that's where you get things like CRT and a whole host of other things. So our legislation will defund any money for K-12 or higher ed going to CRT consultants. We are also not going to allow the staff or employees or teachers in our education system to be subjected to to that type of training where they're forced to sit there and listen. And they have had this in different parts of the country. The San Diego Public Schools did a training where they accused white teachers of being colonizers on stolen land and told them, quote, "You are racist," and quote, "You are upholding racist ideas, structures, and policies." And they recommended that the teachers undergo, quote, "anti-racist therapy." So this is wrong when it's done to our kids, but it's also wrong to force employees to have to go through that. So you are not going to have that in any school in the state of Florida, which is good. But, you know, it's not just in schools, and I know that's been a big focus, and understandably so, because parents send their kids. I think most parents just want them to be educated on the kind of the basics. I don't think that they're interested in this indoctrination. I know I'm not, and I know most of you are not. And it's important. And it is wrong when you're trying to take a kid who's there to learn basics and you're putting ideology and you're trying to indoctrinate. But this also goes beyond education, and it goes beyond just schooling. And it really has become something that is being utilized by corporate America to, I think, create hostile work environments for many of their employees. And you look at what some of these big companies have done in recent years. Bank of America has had training teaching that the United States is a system of, quote, white supremacy, and encourages their employees to become woke at work. Verizon has taught employees that America is fundamentally racist, and they've even promoted defunding the police. And a Google employee program claims that America is, quote, a system of white supremacy, and that all Americans are, quote, raised to be racist. And so that is some of the stuff that we're seeing. And, you know, I think about it, if you're in a company and someone's telling, you know, dirty jokes or doing this, that could be considered a hostile work environment. Well, how is it not a hostile work environment to be attacking people based on their race, or telling them that they're privileged or that they're part of oppressive systems, when all they're doing is showing up to work and trying to earn a living? So we believe that this corporate CRT, it's basically corporate sanctioned racism, and they're trying to shove it down these employees' throats. We believe that that violates the Florida civil rights laws, but to the extent it doesn't, we're going to make sure that the law does include this into these laws, so that employees have an ability to protect themselves against this kind of, really, which is harassment. In some of these companies, I mean, you just think about like what goes through. I mean, a lot of this is virtue signaling. You know, they don't want to be criticized on Twitter or by the mob or something like that. But, you know, you had a lot of these companies, you know, last year when we had the protests and the rioting, you know, they were supporting a lot of these organizations. You know, BLM is a radical organization. They were pouring millions of dollars into it. You know, now they're all concerned because that ideology has been put into place in places like San Francisco and these other places where they don't prosecute people stealing things out of the stores. So they want Congress now to come in and say, hey, stop the smash and grabs. Well, they're partially responsible for creating an environment by having these people elected to office. So we think the corporate CRT is just wrong. We do not want any workers in Florida to be subjected to this, and we're going to make sure that that is the case. And so if you look at what we've done in Florida, we've basically just stood for opportunity for everybody. If you look what we've done in education, we've expanded opportunity to folks that have never had the opportunity we've had now. You look at the different folks here who are all united in not having either state-sanctioned or corporate-sanctioned racism in our state. But this is something that's significant, and they've tried to act like it's not happening, and you'll have media who will say that this doesn't happen, even though we have all these examples. And you should hear Rufo. He's got many, many more examples of this. So it is happening, and I think we have an ability to just draw a line in the sand and say that's not the type of society that we want here in the state of Florida. We want people treated equally. We don't want ideology. So we're gonna hear from some folks who've got some good things to say. So I'm gonna bring up them, and we look forward to hearing those remarks. So first, I'm gonna bring up from the Manhattan Institute. Really has done more than anybody else in our country on exposing CRT in education and in corporate America. Christopher Rufo.
It's great to be with you, and it's great to be in the free state of Florida. I come from the Seattle, Washington area in the slightly less free state of Washington. But why I'm here is because I've spent the last year of my life meticulously documenting critical race theory in American institutions. I first started in the federal government, where I found that among the training programs they were teaching America's nuclear weapons engineers, serious people, to denounce themselves for their identity, to apologize for their whiteness, and then to denounce the country itself. I think creating a national security risk. And I went through these agencies time after time, and I discovered that all of these training programs that we're starting to see in the universities, where we've come to kind of expect it, in corporations, in the federal government, and even in K-12 schools, teaching kids as young as 3 and 4 years old. That they're inherently privileged or oppressive or oppressed, telling white students that they should be feeling guilty or ashamed for their identity, and then telling minority students that their life can't amount to anything, all the deck is stacked against them, and filling them with these dark emotions of pessimism and despair. And as I look through these documents, as I look through these training programs, I found that they all can be filtered back to the ideology known as critical race theory, that started in the universities and then has moved through our bureaucratic institutions, where I think now it's become the dominant ideological orientation in elite institutions everywhere. And so I'm working on these programs. Our former president, President Trump, took on the issue. But what I really have been inspired by the last year is that there is a new group of people emerging and asserting the authority of the American people. These are American parents. It's one thing to have critical race theory in the universities. You can ignore it. It's one thing to have critical race theory even in the federal bureaucracy. It doesn't affect you. But what happened is, in the last year, they have accelerated critical race theory in K-12 public schools, and they've done something that no government should do. Step between parent and child. And I might be old-fashioned, but I still think that parents have the primary responsibility in shaping their children's moral and educational development. So while many of us were feeling a bit demoralized by the state of our country, by the pervasiveness of critical race theory, parents stood up and took action. You started seeing these incredible videos, including from parents here in the state of Florida, going to school board meetings, reviving the American tradition of democratic participation at the most local level. But then something very pernicious happened. The Biden administration, the permanent bureaucracy, the teachers' unions started fighting back, even starting to investigate parents as domestic terrorists. mobilizing the FBI against moms and dads that simply want a good education free of racialist ideology and indoctrination. But this isn't a battle about CRT or no CRT. This is a battle about who our society and our democracy and our government is for. And we are making the argument, and Governor Ron DeSantis is the leader, saying that American democracy is for the people. It has to be accountable to the American citizens. And as a journalist, as a policy researcher, we spend a lot of time in these abstract ideas. We do reports. We hope that they get picked up. But I'll tell you right now, the whole country is watching the state of Florida. There are a lot of smaller states that are intimidated by the bureaucrats, intimidated by the corporations, intimidated by the teachers' unions. But in the state of Florida, you have leadership that is bold and fearless and taking action. And with the very clever acronym, the Stop Woke Act, Governor Ron DeSantis is laying a marker, and he's not only protecting all of the employees and students in the state of Florida, he's providing a model for every state in the United States of America. And I'll just close by saying that critical race theory is wrong. It offers nothing to improve the lives of anyone of any racial background. The latest polling data suggests that among parents of all racial groups, they oppose critical race theory in the curriculum by a 42% margin. And so the task at hand right now is to turn public sentiment, it's to turn this parent movement that is sweeping the nation into concrete policy. That's what this is. Let's get this done.
He might know a few things about critical race theory. I think that's pretty apparent. But, you know, he pointed out something that's very important. In terms of the public, our friends, our neighbors throughout Florida and throughout the country, nobody wants this crap. Okay, this is an elite-driven phenomenon being driven by bureaucratic elites, elites in universities, and elites in corporate America, and they're trying to shove it down the throats of the American people. You're not doing that here in the state of Florida.
So you've been listening in to Governor DeSantis for a while here, talking about critical race theory, one of his major talking points, and specifically out in Florida. He says that he's not allowing it in his schools. And you'll remember out in Virginia, that was a major talking point at the school districts out there as well. So as these elections start to near, probably going to come up again. We're going to stay in Florida. We are going to take a commercial break, but when we come back, we are talking about the surfacing of voter fraud in the Villages. Fox 13 in Tampa breaking it all down. That's coming up in 2 minutes.
Retirees from the Villages are charged with voter fraud. Prosecutors say they cast multiple ballots during last year's presidential election. Now, we don't know which candidate they voted for, but we do know that the Villages is a GOP stronghold.
That retirement community widely known for being pro-Trump. In fact, President Trump held a number of rallies there during his campaign. Our political editor, Craig Patrick's been following this story. And Craig, I know you've really been investigating voter fraud for a long time, like the past 9 years or so. So for perspective, how common or uncommon is something like this?
Well, statistically, it is very, very, very uncommon, but we have found cases, more than just these three, that in this particular circumstance are drawing headlines. And this is something that is and was on the governor's agenda before these cases came to light. These three voters in the Villages retirement community in Sumter County were arrested and accused of voting in 2020 in Florida and then voting again in a different state. Joan Halstead, Jay Sedsick, and John Ryder were all registered Republicans at the time. The Ryder since changed his registration to nonpartisan, according to records. We don't know who they voted for, but we do know their arrests highlight an issue that will come up in the legislature next year. The governor is pressing for a new dedicated police force to find, arrest, and stop the same kind of fraud these voters are accused of committing in the Villages.
We'll have sworn law enforcement officers as part of this. We'll have investigators. We'll have the statewide prosecutor that's able to bring the cases.
The governor is proposing a 52-member police force dedicated to investigating voter fraud, costing $5.7 million.
The first person that gets caught, no one's going to want to do it again after that because they know that there's going to be enforcement.
In addition to that, look up Florida Secretary of State online. You'll see Secretary Laura Lee has launched a site that tipsters can use to easily report suspected voter fraud.
We've worked hard to ensure our elections meet the highest standards for integrity and security.
And 2 years ago, Florida joined a coalition of 30 states in the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC for short. They share and match data to improve accuracy of voter lists to reduce or prevent the potential for illegally voting in multiple states.
By intelligently comparing their voter data to lots of other information.
We've investigated voter fraud in Florida and found that it does occur, but also appears to be exceedingly rare. For example, 6 years ago, a joint investigation between Fox 13 Tampa Bay and Fox 35 Orlando uncovered isolated cases of people voting in Florida and North Carolina in the same presidential election.
Because I live both in places. I live in North Carolina, I pay taxes in North Carolina, I do the same thing here.
And along the way, we found people didn't appear to understand why that's illegal.
Well, I didn't know that.
In separate investigations, one study identified 491 instances out of billions of votes cast. And the Electronic Registration Information Center identified 372 possible cases out of around 14.6 million. Those are possible cases, not confirmed. Now, if every one of those possible cases in the ERIC analysis were in fact cases of voter fraud or multiple voting, that would still only account for 0.0025%, well less than 1%, which speaks to how statistically rare this appears to be. But at the same time, we certainly have a history of very, very close elections, going back to 2000 in particular and the recounts of 2018, which certainly brings the issue into play.
Yeah, 0.25% makes you wonder if you need a 52-member police force for this, which sounds kind of expensive. Do we know how many tips or complaints of voter fraud we actually got last election? The state,
in
rather.
2020, the state, yes, the state received 262 complaints of suspected or possible illegal voting. The state election managers reviewed those 262, determined that of those, 75, they saw whatever was there that merited further review by law enforcement or prosecutors was passed along. 75 out of more than 11 million votes cast, and it certainly looks as if among those 75, at least 3 of them were flagged in advance to arrest with these individuals in the Villages.
Wow, that is a tiny amount, that's for sure. All right, thank you so much, Craig.
Well, that was Fox 13 in Tampa right there. Really great breakdown. It is 9 o'clock on the dot here in Phoenix, Arizona, 11 o'clock out on the East Coast. We'll take you to a couple different live looks across the country. The beautiful Christmas tree outside of the Fox News headquarters. We've also been following quite a bit of weather tonight. This shot coming from, I believe, Ames, Iowa. The video kind of shaking around a little bit. The camera shaking around a little bit, and then Empire State Building and the White House. The First Lady making her way out to Milwaukee, because we all remember that deadly Christmas parade out in Waukesha. Well, she went there and visited some of the sites along with the second gentleman as well. So we're going to play out a segment for you from our Fox 6 Milwaukee team as they covered her visit.
Rob, thanks. First Lady Jill Biden will be in Milwaukee and Waukesha today. She is scheduled to meet with families of the victims in the Christmas parade tragedy in Waukesha.
As she will also stop at Children's Wisconsin, where 18 young victims were treated and one remains hospitalized this morning. Our Amelia Jones is live with what's on her agenda for today.
Good morning. First Lady Jill Biden will be joined with the second gentleman, the husband of Vice President Kamala Harris, Douglas Emhoff, as well as the U.S. Surgeon General on her trip. The trio lands in Milwaukee around 3:15. Once they land, they will head to Children's Wisconsin first. At the hospital, the three will meet with healthcare workers who have cared for patients throughout the pandemic and who cared for those 18 victims that were injured from the Waukesha Christmas parade tragedy. While at Children's, they will also meet with kids who just received the COVID-19 vaccine and their families. Then around 6 tonight, that's when the First Lady, Second Gentleman, and U.S. Surgeon General will come to Waukesha, and they will meet with families of first responders and victims of the parade. And this visit comes as Children's Wisconsin releases that 2 more children were released from the hospital. As you mentioned, Nicola, Children's says that 1 more remains in the hospital, and they say that their condition is fair. Live in Waukesha this morning, Amelia Jones, Fox 6 News.
Amelia. So that was obviously a preview of the event, and we are going to be hopefully playing that out for you a little bit later in the evening as well. We do have a tweet here, though, from Aaron Mabin with Fox 6 in Milwaukee showing First Lady Jill Biden visiting the memorial for the Waukesha parade tragedy victims alongside the mayor of Waukesha and the Surgeon General, too. You can see the First Lady putting down some gifts and honoring the lives that were lost in that tragic event. People still reeling over everything that happened just ahead of the holidays. Well, speaking of other events across the country, take a look at this. The Astroworld stage dismantled. It has remained in place since the crowd surge that killed 10 concert goers during rapper Travis Scott's performance on November 5th. So they were breaking it down today. In the 40 days since, tens of thousands of people crushed into that relatively small space for Scott's third Astroworld Music Fest in his hometown. Investigators, both with various law enforcement agencies and attorneys representing victims, have collected and photographed evidence at the venue. So they've been taking a look at this stage setup. So it remained in place so they could gather quite a bit of that evidence. So I believe they have everything that they need at this point. As you can see, the trucks rolling up and taking it down piece by piece, as lawsuits are still in place for many of those Astroworld victims and people who were involved in the concert that just really honestly suffered some mental issues because of being in the crowd. Still will take a while to fully take down this stage, but these were aerial video and pictures that we got from earlier today. Well, we appreciate all of you being with us here on Live Now from Fox. We are going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, the top stories of the day, we'll break it all down for you. 2 minutes. Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Daytona Everett here from our Phoenix, Arizona studio. We have been covering the weather pretty much all evening and all week, too. Here's the storm system moving through the Midwest right now. There's tornado warnings. They were showing a little bit of video from Missouri on Fox Weather. We'll be kind of keeping our eyes on their coverage through the rest of the night as well. But as we have been telling you throughout the day, it was President Biden who made his way to Kentucky, speaking with residents there on the ground who are affected by the tornadoes. Here's the latest from Fox Weather's Robert Ray, who was standing in the wreckage and destruction from these deadly tornadoes.
As if all of this behind me isn't enough, a miserable day with winds and cloudy skies here, not helping the mood of this region and the cleanup, as President Biden has visited the area here in western Kentucky, not only surveying all this damage from the air, but looking at it from the ground and talking to residents and officials alike.
There's a lot of, going to need help, and a lot of the business people are going to be wondering what's going on. There may be things available that would be helpful 6 weeks, 6 months from now that you're unaware of. And so I've instructed my team to make you all aware of everything that is available from a federal level.
That was at Billy's birthday at Holy.
Meanwhile, in towns like Mayfield and Dawson Springs, people are going through the remnants of their destroyed homes and looking for anything that could be left, mementos, whether it be photos or wedding rings, anything they can grab onto that will make them feel better. One woman I spoke to lived in an apartment complex of 45 different units, all destroyed. She was reminiscing about the fact that she's still alive as she was going through some of her materials.
I'm just getting out what little I can from my apartment. There's not much left. It's just like starting all over again fresh. When you're older, it's really hard.
And these are the kind of challenging situations that search and rescue crews are still going through, looking for the missing. You can see this school bus turned over by the wind and thrown and damaged. Unbelievable destruction, and so many people still missing in the region. The National Weather Service is still out surveying the damage, trying to figure out the strength of this tornado that was on the ground for roughly 200 miles, wreaking havoc here in western Kentucky, southern Illinois, and parts of Tennessee. There is the outside possibility that this could be an EF5 in some spots. That would be winds above 200 miles per hour. The state of Kentucky trying to figure out how many people have actually died as the numbers continue to change here in a region ravaged by Mother Nature. No one knows exactly how long it's going to take to clean all of this up and to get through this holiday season and try to feel some sort of hope. But there's been so much loss of life and so much devastation that the road ahead is going to be long and tough. Reporting in Mayfield, Kentucky, Robert Ray, Fox Weather.
So again, that was Fox Weather's Robert Ray, who has been doing some great reporting from there on the ground. He started talking about ahead of the holidays, many of these people having to deal with all of this. Well, Hunter Davis was in Arkansas today for a Christmas toy and clothing drive just after the tornado ripped through.
Hey there, I'm coming to you guys with a smile on my face really for the first time in a few days since we started reporting on this devastating storm, and this is why I'm smiling. Take a look here at this community in Truman. This, as we know, is where that tornado that tracked well into Tennessee originated. This community's only got about 6,000 people, so you can imagine that this, at least EF3 tornado really devastated this area, but they want to make Christmas special for all of these families that have lost so much. And actually joining me here, we actually have Trinity Fritz, and she is kind of helping get all of this organized. Trinity, first, thank you so much for joining us. Second, I'm glad that you guys are okay.
Yes.
And third, talk to me about what y'all have going on in here.
Well,
Well, we are working on getting Christmas organized for the families that were affected through the tornado. We're setting up a Christmas emporium that they can come to on Sunday to fill Christmas needs.
And talk to me about what you hope this does for your community. I mean, you guys were just devastated over the weekend. So talk to me about, I guess, what you hope this does for them moving forward.
Well, I think it's a really good way to help these families that, already are struggling in some sense and need just help moving forward now, even more so in this Christmas. We want to be special for them. So I think that it's a great way to move forward for our community.
Wonderful. Well, we thank you for what you're doing here, and we're going to send you on your way because I know you guys are really busy here. And like she mentioned, this is really for all of those kids to come. Their parents are going to come here and pick out those Christmas gifts for them. Also worth mentioning, this is not just for those, families who lost everything, but there are people who worked at these local businesses who are now closed because of damage. So they'll be able to come here and grab some of those gifts because they're going to miss a few paychecks during this holiday season. So bicycles, books, scooters, toys, really you guys name it, and those families are going to be able to come here and hopefully get a smile back on their face for this holiday season. Back to you.
And again, that was Fox Weather's Hunter Davis reporting from Arkansas. And now Max Gordon in Lake Tahoe talking about this Sierra snowstorm. We've spoken with him the past couple of days as they were worrying about some avalanches because of this winter storm rolling through. Here's his latest report from there in California.
Avalanches typically form when there's unstable snow combined with terrain that's steep enough for a slide, usually at an angle of about 30 degrees or more. There also needs to be some kind of trigger, either a skier going down the mountain or maybe a tree falling. According to the Sierra Avalanche Center, intense storms with heavy amounts of snowfall in a short period of time increase the likelihood of an avalanche. That's what we've seen here in the Lake Tahoe area, and that's why there's been an avalanche warning over the past few days. The Sierra Avalanche Center also issues an advisory every day all winter long to get the word out about avalanche conditions. According to the Sierra Avalanche Center, the biggest clue that there could be an avalanche in an area is the sign of a recent avalanche. Shooting cracks in the snow and collapsing snowpack, signs of snow instability, are also things to look out for when you're out on the slopes.
Any place in the mountainous west with mountains and snow, you can have avalanches. Last year we had 37 deaths in the United States. That was the worst a year for avalanche deaths in, I think, over 100 years.
The folks at the Sierra Avalanche Center say if you get caught in an avalanche, you should immediately start trying to dig your way out because help might not arrive for a while. You should also ski or snowboard with a partner so they can assist in the case of an avalanche. In South Lake Tahoe, Max Gordon, Fox Weather.
All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll come back with some of the other top stories of the day, including the latest on a fire. A follow-up from yesterday, a fire overnight that took the life of one person. We'll be getting a live report from there on the scene in just a few minutes. Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Daytona Everett here, bringing you to all of the top stories of the day. Well, if you were joining us just last night, we were talking about this massive fire happening in Scottsdale, Arizona, and actually an update on that today. We're hearing that a body was discovered inside that Scottsdale home that was completely destroyed. We do have Fox 10's Irene Snyder joining us live from that Scottsdale home. Irene, what are we learning?
Hey, Daytona, as you mentioned, we now know that one person has died. Several animals died as well. Several people told me that the person who lived in this home, we don't know if that's the person who died, but the person who lived in this home, they say, bred several dogs, and plenty of dogs that live with her here as well. Now, it's been about 24 hours since that fire broke out, shortly before 9 o'clock yesterday. And out here, the fire, of course, is gone, but you can still smell the smoke.
Quite honestly, I've never seen anything that fast. It was just way above the trees, and it was just popping.
Flames erupted from the Scottsdale home at 120th Street in Shea, leaving one person and several animals dead.
She was a breeder of Papillon dogs, so I didn't know how many dogs were in the house.
Scottsdale Fire says they've received reports of explosions shortly before 9 p.m. Tuesday night. They say it was hard for them to even get inside the home.
The roof did collapse during that fire last night, but there is additional amount of debris inside that house that's going to be an extensive investigation. There were reports of explosions going off while they were doing the firefight, and you could hear ammunition rounds going off as well.
That homeowner, fire officials say, lived alone. At this point, they have not confirmed the identity of the body found in the home. Neighbors say the owner was an artist and had paint in the garage and propane. The same home went up in flames in 2014. That day, about 10 dogs were killed.
6.5 years ago, I worked for her. She had a fire here, and I helped her clean up her fire. And I came back just a week ago, and she called me and asked me if I could come out and help her get her place cleaned up and that. I left at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and somebody texted me this morning.
And so far, police say they have not yet been able to get in touch with the homeowner. Again, we know that one person is dead, several animals, but we do not know the identity of the person who died in the fire. Daytona?
All right, Fox 10's Irene Snyder reporting live for us tonight. Thank you so much for that update. And we're going to keep moving along here as we bring up our radar of weather that is moving through the country right now. As we said, tornado warnings, specifically in the Midwest tonight, and wild weather out in Minnesota. Wind gusts reaching up to 90 miles per hour in 6 different states. That was the latest that we were getting from our Fox weather reporters out there. But I do want to go back into some other fire news. A fire department refusing service out in Los Angeles. Our Fox 11 team brings us latest.
Paramedics responding to a 911 call refused to go into an acute care facility to render aid to a man who is suffering cardiac arrest.
This happened in Rialto, where Christina Gonzalez is live with the story you'll see only right here on Fox 11. Christina.
Yes, good evening. The video you're about to see, which we obtained through a records request, refers to a department that is truly admired and particularly adamant of being interactive with the community. So when this was put out, it has been described as an aberration by officials, which makes the whole thing even more difficult to watch.
It's a very hard video to watch.
Rialto Mayor Pro Tem Ed Scott referring to police camera video of fire personnel responding on November 11th.
It's a break for a male not breathing.
The 911 call for a male not breathing came from the Rialto Post-Acute Care Facility, where a Rialto police officer responded along with Rialto fire paramedics, who told the officer the patient had to be brought out to them. And that's when the officer went in.
They're not going to come in. They're saying it's a state law that they can't come in.
It's a cardiac arrest. He's completely out. We're doing the pressure. You cannot move him.
Inside the patient's room, several people are working on him. The bed has no wheels, so they're not able to move him, and the officer jumps into action.
Someone get up there to help her steer it, and I can push it.
They push the patient out the door of the facility to the waiting firefighters, who eventually do transport the man to the hospital. But 56-year-old Joseph Angulo died that night.
I became aware due to a complaint from one one of the employees down at the care center, so I reported it to the city attorney.
We reached out to California's Emergency Medical Services Authority, getting a statement reading that, quote, upon acceptance of a call assignment, California paramedics cannot refuse service, i.e. assessment, treatment, transport, unless directed by law enforcement or if the scene is unsafe. But we were also directed to this memo from the San Bernardino County Fire Chiefs Association. It outlines best practices for long-term care facilities like the Post-Acute Care Center, including that dispatch centers request facilities to move patients to the door or outside. Still, the memo is dated April of 2020, over a year ago, and we asked if the city had any similar guidance.
To my understanding, there may have been something in the very beginning, but currently there is not.
At tonight's council meeting, this from an emotional Rialto mayor.
I don't think there's any words that we can say, anyone, to underscore that we want to have a thorough investigation.
Rialto Fire Department's acting chief, Brian Park, also issuing a statement reading in part, the department personnel under investigation have already been placed on leave pending an independent third-party investigation that is in progress. He also went on to thank the police officer and the nurses for what he describes as their heroic actions. Joseph Angulo, 56 years old, is a man you saw in the video. He did die, and his family is aware of what happened. We have yet to hear from them. I'm Cristina Gonzalez in Rialto. Back to you in the studio.
All right, a devastating story right there out of Rialto in California. Any follow-ups on that we'll bring to you with our Fox 11 team. We're going to take another 2-minute break. When we come back, we are going out to Michigan as they are a hotspot right now for the COVID-19 pandemic, with the new Omicron variant really ripping through not only the United States, but globally as well. Still, a point place right now is Michigan. So our Fox 2 Detroit team is going to break all of that down for us.
It has been 1 year since the first COVID-19 vaccine was administered here in Metro Detroit. Still, area hospitals, you look around, they're experiencing another surge in cases this morning. The doctor's in. We have a lot of questions, don't we? Joining us live this morning, Dr. Anurag Malani, IHA infectious disease doctor at St. Joe's, Ann Arbor. Doctor, good morning.
Good morning, Gina. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. A lot of questions. First, just give us the status. How are things looking now as far as COVID patients in your hospital system? Give us the breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really busy time. This is the fourth surge we've experienced, but I think this has been the most difficult. It's been a very slow and steady climb until probably the last few weeks, where cases and hospitalizations rose exponentially. So right now in our system, we have over 400 hospitalized patients with COVID. This makes up almost 1 out of every 4 hospitalized patients in our system has COVID. And that's pretty similar to what we see in the state.
Doctor, when you look at these patients, when you see them, how sick are they? Are they vaccinated?
Yeah, I mean, there's a range. So if you were to look at any given day, probably about 70%, 70 to 75% of patients are unvaccinated. Probably the other 25-30% are vaccinated. What we know is if you're vaccinated, the risk of spread to kind of severe disease, ICU stay, ventilation, all those things, they're definitely much reduced. And your risk of actually dying is much, much higher. It's actually 14 times higher if you're unvaccinated.
Let's talk about this Omicron variant, and I know that we're just starting to see it in our state. What do you know about it? What can you tell us?
Yeah, so this is kind of the new variant, the new kid on the block. So we've heard a lot about Delta. Before Delta, we heard about Alpha. This is first described and first reported in South Africa. And what we are seeing, similar to what they're seeing in South Africa, is that this is a highly transmissible variant. The concern is based on the number of mutations with this specific variant and virus, is that the vaccines and some of our therapeutics may not be as effective as they were. So I think we're at the very early stages of Omicron. We think that this is, based on reports, it's about 50% more contagious or more transmissible than Delta. And then we have to sort of see what happens with, what does that mean about hospitalizations and other things that come with that.
Doctor, you have got to be frustrated with where we are right now. I know that many of us are. I mean, we did so much in the beginning of the pandemic as far as shutting down the state, wearing masks. We've been a year, we've had access to vaccines. So why do you think we're in this position that we're in right now?
Well, I think, Dina, it's very difficult, right? I think this has been a pandemic that continues on, and really none of us want this to continue. I don't really want to wear a mask, and I kind of want to go about, the normal that we used to remember. But I think the difficulty is that this, at least what we're seeing, has been fueled largely by patients that have not been vaccinated, which is difficult because we know that we have a safe and effective vaccine. We know that the risk of developing COVID if you're unvaccinated is 6 times higher. Your risk of hospitalization is 11 times higher. And the risk of dying is 14 times higher. So we're at a state, really, in our state and in our country, where the amount of cases and the amount of hospitalizations we're seeing, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to have 1,100 Americans die every day because of COVID, and which is largely preventable through vaccines.
And when people say we need to learn to live with COVID like we learned to live with the flu, how do you compare the two?
Well, COVID is not the flu, and COVID is much deadlier than the flu, at least 10 times deadlier. And we know, what we're seeing. I mentioned earlier that about 25% of hospitalized patients in Michigan, 1 of every 4 hospital beds is occupied by a COVID patient. We do not see that with influenza. Now, the other thing that is much different than influenza is that our vaccines are much more effective than the influenza vaccine. The typical influenza vaccine is, maybe 40 to 50% effective. The COVID vaccines are much more effective than that. I think there will come a time where enough of the population has immunity, and then hopefully COVID becomes a much milder illness, but we're not there at this time.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much. Good information this morning. I do want to invite our viewers, if you have questions, if you are hesitant to get the vaccine and maybe you have a question for the doctor, because that's really what you want, doctor. You want to talk to people and understand their concerns and maybe answer them. So let's invite people to do that. On our Twitter, I put a post if you want to use #the9, and Dr. Anurag will join us next hour and we will answer some of those questions. Doctor, thank you. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome back, everybody. The doctor's in this morning. We're talking about COVID-19, the latest variant, booster shots, and the current surge in cases. That's really putting a strain on our healthcare system. So joining us this morning, Dr. Anurag Malani, IHA, infectious disease doctor at St. Joe's, Ann Arbor. Doctor, welcome back. We're going to get right into it. We got a lot of good questions from our viewers, and some of them are tough questions, but let's go ahead and just talk about this right off the bat, Doctor. This viewer says, why does the media keep changing the narrative? First it was cases, then deaths. Now it's back to positive cases. No talk of death related to positive cases. So which is it? The new variant is not deadly. So people are testing positive just like the flu. So this is, we can feel the frustration in this question. A lot of people feeling that Dr. Malani, if people aren't dying as much now, if death rates are lower, what is the concern that you have?
Yeah, thanks, Dina. Sorry, we had a little mishap with the AirPods. There are actually, the hospitalizations have been the highest that they have been in the pandemic, even higher than where we were last year when we didn't have vaccine and we didn't have therapeutics. The concern, obviously, when you have 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 hospitalized beds are occupied by COVID patients, this has impacts on non-COVID patients. And what has been shown, throughout many studies, including, our own analysis in the data in our state, is when hospitals are at and way above capacity, this impacts non-COVID patients and their outcomes. Surgeries are delayed, procedures are delayed. Patients don't have the outcomes that they should have if we weren't in this, overcapacity crisis.
Okay, so in other words, it is good news that not as many people are dying, but it is sobering news the amount of people who are hospitalized and still getting sick from COVID.
I would say that it is a very large amount of people that are still dying. 1,100 Americans dying every day is not a small amount. Last week, in our state, we had about 90 Michiganders dying every day. Sure, that may not be exactly where it was at its peak, but that is an unacceptable amount. The majority of people that develop COVID, they are not hospitalized, and they do fortunately recover. But every case of COVID has potential to spread and to spread to people that are more vulnerable. And we also know that even in a younger population, which definitely in this surge, in this current crisis, overall, we have seen a younger population. But we know that there are, long-term manifestations from developing COVID, such as long COVID, where patients may have symptoms for a long period of time.
Yeah, our Maria Liu just posted a good article about that on our website, by the way, what her experience is with long-haul COVID. Doctor, I want to get to this one. Should I get an antibody test before getting the booster shot? Let's talk about the importance of boosters.
Yeah, this is a really great question. And boosters, I think what has become clear, and this was actually becoming clear before the emergence of Omicron, was that we needed to get boosters. And the reason why is because people had waning immunity, meaning that their antibody levels over a period of time were not as protective as they were months ago. So this was becoming clear, and now what is also becoming clear with Omicron, which has these mutations in the what's called the spike protein in terms of how it binds to our cells, is based on that the vaccines by themselves are not going to be sufficient enough for protection. So that means that really everyone that has had an mRNA vaccine that is 16 and above at this time should get a booster. We feel, based on the data that is coming and based on the experiences in South Africa and based on what we've seen in the States, which is still primarily Delta, that boosters are quite protective. And when you had asked earlier in the previous segment about what we were seeing, we are not seeing patients hospitalized that have had boosters. That's actually the good news there.
Okay. Let me get in a couple more, Doctor. This is a little bit of a complicated question, but can you explain to us in a simple way how these new viruses, these new strains keep popping up? This viewer says, is somebody releasing these viruses, or what's going on?
Yeah, it's another great question. And so in a nutshell, the more virus you have, that gives it a chance for the virus to change over time, to develop mutations. Some may make the virus less fit, some may make the virus more fit being more transmissible. So we know that we don't live, in a box. We don't live just in Michigan. We live in the United States, and we are a part of a global, global world. And so what happens offshores can impact us in this country. We also know that while the vaccine rates are not optimal in our country right now, especially in Michigan, where 55% of the population is fully vaccinated, we also know once you leave the United States, for example, South Africa, the population that's been fully vaccinated is about 30%. It's much lower. So the less people are immune to this, the more likely that the virus can change over time. And this is not unexpected. Obviously, we're concerned about it. And I think this, again, hits home the need for vaccines, boosters. The less virus, the less transmission, the less the potential for change.
Doctor, I want to get to this one because this is what people are feeling out there. My question is, when will the news media break the real news and let people know that the vaccines don't work? So can you give us the science of these vaccines? Because it does feel like with all these hospitalizations, people are saying, what's going on? Is it working?
Yeah. Again, these are all great questions. I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation available, but I think the evidence is overwhelmingly clear. There have been over almost 500 million doses of vaccine administered in the United States, and billions of doses that have been administered throughout the world. We actually have a very good sense of short-term effects, long-term effects, and there are not long-term effects associated with the vaccines. They are safe and effective. And as what I had said in the earlier segment, if you're unvaccinated, you are 6 times more likely to develop COVID. You are 11 times more likely to be hospitalized, and you are 14 times more likely to die. The majority of patients that we see are unvaccinated. Yes, we are seeing some vaccinated patients in the hospital, but those are patients that typically are discharged earlier. They're patients that are typically not progressing on to severe disease and ICU stay. And the part of that that's really important is we realize now the importance of boosters. There has been some confusion about messaging around boosters, but I think it's become very crystal clear that you need a booster if you are 16 and above and your doses were 6 months ago, if you had the mRNA vaccines. If you had the J&J vaccine, which was the 1-dose vaccine, you need to get a second dose as long as that's 2 months after.
Paul Bloom joining us from the... So that was just a little sneak peek at the interview that we did with Paul Bloom earlier. That what you were just watching was Fox 2 in Detroit talking about COVID-19. So always like to play out these segments from throughout the day. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll be going out to that conversation about the Kim Potter trial, as tomorrow is day 7. The state likely to rest its case, possibly Kim Potter taking the stand on Friday. More coming up here on Live Now from Fox. Paul Bloom joining us from the studio. Paul, a busy day today and emotional testimony from his father, right?
A very important day in this trial, in that we do believe these are the last final witnesses the state is going to call under its primary case. They didn't formally rest at the end of today. They'll probably sleep on this and then do so in the morning. But we absolutely think these final witnesses, the state's paid use of force expert who came in to assess Kimberly Potter's actions that day, and then, as you mentioned it, Daunte Wright's father, Arbery Wright. Now, what's interesting in Minnesota court law, if you will, or court practices, is it allows for what we call spark of life testimony. It says really nothing to do with the incident, the scene that day, the traffic stop in April. What this is just to humanize the deceased, allow a loved one, a family member, to talk about their grief and what the loss has meant to their family. Take a listen.
I was so happy for him because he was so happy. He was so happy about Junior. This was my chance to be a grandfather.
Did they have a close relationship?
Yes.
And did Daunte Jr. spend a lot of time with your family as well?
Yeah, Daunte Jr., Daunte lived with us. Junior was pretty much there every day. And he loved his son.
And of course, they had shown a photo in court of young 20-year-old Daunte with his baby son there, Junior, Daunte Jr., Arbery, referencing how emotional it is that Junior no longer has his father around. But again, Arbery just on the stand for a couple of minutes, just allowed to kind of speak to the loss, the grief the family is feeling. Important to point out there, the defense did not even bother cross-examining him.
Right. Well, this isn't the only family member that's taken the stand of Daunte Wright. His mother also taking the stand in the very beginning, right?
Yeah, very good point. The state started this case 1 week ago, basically mother and father bookending this case, sort of the emotions at the start, the emotions at the end. The mother was a little bit different type of witness. She was a fact witness in that you may remember her testimony. She's on the phone with Daunte during the traffic stop. Elena, the girlfriend in the seat over, turning the video camera on Daunte. So she had some factual evidence she had to get in and on the record. And of course, that emotional scene where she rushes to the scene and just wants information and sees her son lying under that sheet, that law enforcement white sheet. So her testimony a little bit different, but clearly the state knew they wanted to get this jury in with some emotion, and they wanted to end their case with some emotion. Again, Daytona, I expect the state to formally rest first thing tomorrow morning when court gavels into session.
Paul, any key takeaways from, obviously, the father stepping up was probably the biggest takeaway from today, but from the use of force expert and then also an officer taking the stand. And there was also a bit of evidence that was denied by the judge when it comes to Wright trying to flee that day.
Yeah, you watch this thing closely today, Daytona. All right, let's bring you up to speed. Now, the use of training officer from Brooklyn Center, his testimony bridging both days. Nothing terribly remarkable today about his testimony. I think the jury takes away the state's use of force expert. This is Seth Stoughton. He's a University of South Carolina associate law professor. He's a former police officer. And interesting to note on this day where there's been some news in federal court with Derek Chauvin's guilty plea. Seth Stoughton was the state's use of force expert in Derek Chauvin's murder trial and testified. So he's become a familiar face here in the Twin Cities. But Stoughton is called in. He's paid. He assesses all of the body camera videos. He's a quote-unquote expert, an authority on police policy and use of force, and he assesses the actions of Kimberly Potter that day. And what's interesting is because of this two-pronged approach the defense is taking, that it was an accident, it was an innocent mistake, but also if she had attempted to use deadly force, she would have been authorized to stop a fleeing Daunte Wright with one of her officers in danger. So the expert did have to kind of toe this line and address all of these issues. Basically, was it a mistake? Did she have the right to use her taser? Did she have her right to use her firearm? And this expert, Professor Stoughton, did basically double down. He says, no, she did not have the right to use the taser, and no, she did not have the right to fire her gun. So in both cases, she is at fault and should be held criminally liable. And you mentioned the piece of evidence that didn't come in. What had happened is as he was assessing that traffic stop, he said that had Dante Wright just been allowed to leave the scene, the officers got backed away, he's wanted on a gross misdemeanor count, they knew the identity of that young man, and they could have tracked him down afterwards. But the defense wanted to say, wait a minute, he's not an easy guy to track down. He's run from police before. He's run from arrests before. And we want this jury to know it wasn't that simple. Right. And in the end, Judge Chu said, there's no way Kimberly Potter knew that in that moment. The jury will not hear that testimony. So that sort of prior bad acts, if you will, remains out. The jury didn't hear anything of it.
So that was denied. And tomorrow, marking day 7, a week of this trial, although, Paul, it feels a lot longer than that. And you say the state likely will rest tomorrow.
Exactly. And then the defense starts calling witnesses, Daytona. And then the jury's been promised Kim Potter, the defendant, so she will take the stand. The question is when. There were some logistics that they were going over today, and the way they were talking, I wouldn't necessarily expect her tomorrow. They have several of their own experts. They also have some character witnesses they want to get to. I would mark it down on your calendar. Look for Kim Potter on the witness stand Friday, heading into the weekend.
And we'll have it definitely here on Live Now from Fox. Last one for you, Paul, just because you covered the Derek Chauvin trial so closely. He pleaded guilty to violating George Floyd's civil rights today. What are your takeaways from that?
Well, a couple interesting things, right? The intersection of these two cases. You may remember in April when this trial was going on, the state case, or at least the trial of Derek Chauvin in state court. That's when the Kimberly Potter, Dante Wright traffic stop occurred. So these cases have been linked. So the fact that there was this guilty plea today while Kimberly Potter's trial was happening was just sort of interesting. But the one takeaway I would have is Derek Chauvin in the end wasn't sentenced in the federal court. The government, the U.S. government, and his defense team agreeing on a 25-year sentence. This judge is going to wait on it. He's going to do a pre-sentence investigation before leveling the formal sentence, but it looks like he'll get 25 years. And I would just point out, as you move on here, is in the federal prison system, a prisoner does typically 85% of their time behind bars, and then the final 15% under supervision. In state court, where he was sentenced to 22.5 years, here in Minnesota, a prisoner only typically does 2/3 of that sentence, 67%. So he took on more prison time today. He avoids trial, but no doubt he's taking on more prison time.
All right, well, that's a fantastic breakdown. Fox 9's Paul Bloom for us there, covering multiple angles of what's going on in Minnesota today. We appreciate you.
You bet, Daytona. Thank you.
Well, and George Floyd's family speaking outside of the courthouse today following that guilty plea. We'll listen in to what they have to say.
So, my name is attorney Jeff Storms. I'm here also with attorney Bhavani Verbindran. We're two of the attorneys that represent the Floyd family, along with two of America's great attorneys, Ben Crump and Tony Romanucci. Here today from George's family, who are obviously more important than we are. We have with us Rodney Floyd, Brandon Williams, Philonise Floyd, and Terrence Floyd. And I'm sure you all got to know them throughout the trial, and they've been incredible ambassadors for our state and country throughout all these proceedings. We're going to try to keep the comments relatively brief. We certainly applaud the efforts of the U.S. Attorney's Office here. This plea today is historic, as I'm sure you'll hear more about from their office. It follows from the tremendous efforts of Keith Ellison and his team in initially obtaining the conviction of Derek Chauvin. Certainly today we saw a certain level of accountability, but Derek Chauvin was also left with very little choice. He pleaded guilty today after putting this family through a gut-wrenching trial where the jury very quickly realized that he was guilty of all charges in one of the most catastrophic and egregious civil rights violations that anyone has ever seen. Obviously, this brings a certain level of closure, but not complete closure. At this point, we still have 3 other officers who have not agreed to be held accountable in any sense. And this family is looking at 2 additional trials in the very near future. So while we applaud those efforts, and this is another step towards closure, there's a lot of work left to do. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the family.
If you're comfortable removing your mask when you speak, that helps you put it down.
I just have to put it like this. Okay, go ahead. No.
And if you would each identify yourselves for the tape, please,
Yes,
so we don't
sir.
mix you up.
I'm Rodney Floyd, George Floyd's brother. And in the courtroom today, it's going to be a long process. I would like to say that much. But honestly, hearing what Derek Chauvin said in the courtroom, it's not exactly what we wanted. We wanted this in the beginning of the trial, the state trial, but he's pleading guilty. But again, it's not because he wants to; it's because this is what it is. But anything y'all want to know?
Your reaction?
My reaction, honestly, it's not what you would expect. I mean, I'm still feeling the same pain, anger I felt in the beginning because he could have did this last year. Started this on that day. So today it's still the same pain I've been felt.
Well, as Jeff mentioned, you've got 2 other trials coming up here, unless there are guilty pleas. What are you feeling heading into that after what you've just been through last spring?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
As Jeff mentioned, there's 2 other trials coming up. Are you how are you preparing emotionally for that, given what you've been through today and then the trial last spring?
All right. Well, to introduce myself, I'm Brandon Williams. I'm not really sure on how to answer that. It's a lot that I want to say but we can't due to the magnitude of everything, and everything is so sensitive right now with all of the other trials pending. We can't say much, but we're feeling confident after today.
Brandon, Julie is your name before TV. Were you all consulted about this sentence range that was given to Chauvin, and how do you feel about it being concurrent with the state?
So I'm just going to jump in. We're not going to comment on any conversations between the family and the U.S. Attorney's Office. If Brandon wants to comment on the potential sentence, he's welcome to, but we're not going to comment on any of those communications.
I don't really feel no kind of way. The one thing that I can say is the possibility of him getting more time and having to serve more time, that's a good thing.
Brandon, what was it like when you heard him stand up and say the word guilty in open court? What was that like for your family?
I don't know. I think it's the first time, so hearing him accept accountability was nice, but I didn't feel a thing. We were in court with a minor who he also pled guilty to charges of assaulting him, and after hearing the details of it, that guy's a monster. He should have been arrested in 2017 and had justice, and had he been held accountable for what he did in 2017 to that minor, George Floyd would still be here. Today he had a chance to blow kisses and give air hugs to his family. We can't do that to our loved one who's not here. So I don't feel a thing.
What runs through your mind when you see an apology? Were you expecting an apology?
I don't expect an apology, and I don't honestly care to have one. He knew what he was doing. He had 9 minutes and 29 seconds to understand what he was doing and stop kneeling. He chose not to.
What runs through your mind when you see Derek Chauvin in person again today?
What I want to say, I don't think it's suitable for all of these cameras, but very bad thoughts. I want him to feel the same pain that we felt watching the video. I want him to feel the same pain that he inflicted on George Floyd. I hope that answers your question.
Why do you think he changed his mind and changed his intent of the plea?
Well, I mean, I don't think he had a choice. He was guilty on all charges, and it's very clear and evident that what he did, he's guilty of.
Hi, I'm Phalonis Floyd, brother of George Floyd.
I know at the sentencing you mentioned that you wanted to hear him say why. Were you looking for that today?
That was Terrence. Me? Yeah, go ahead.
repeat your question, please? This is Terrence Floyd, brother of George Floyd.
You mentioned back at the sentencing hearing after it was over that you wanted to know why you were hoping to say that. Tell me what you expect to hear from them today and what hearing yes to the details.
I actually wanted to know why, but hearing him say that the plea to being guilty, it made me feel like finally he took accountability, and wanting to know why, it really does. I know why. I understand why, because when he said guilty, he's pleading guilty. I know he know why, so I don't even need to even explain it anymore.
With this plea agreement, he'll get out of prison. In his mid-60s, it's not that old these days. What do you think about that? He's not going to die in prison.
The fact still remains that he's actually going to be in prison, and he's going to do time for what he did. So that's good enough for me.
As family, are you all surprised that he pleaded guilty to this charge? Did this surprise you at all?
No. Everything surprises me for what I seen from the beginning. He was very nonchalant. He really didn't say a lot of different things, but when I walked up into this courtroom, and before I even got into the courtroom, you can see an eagle, and that eagle symbolizes freedom, and it's everywhere now. And the way I look at everything, if you can make federal laws to protect that bird, you can make federal laws to protect people of color. And Frederick Douglass once quoted that if it takes a while to make progress, then you know you have something brewing. So to me, it's big just being able to be here and get the understanding of what's going on in this case. We came here just like we did before. We just wanted accountability, because we can never have justice, because we can never get George back.
Long time here. Do you guys feel like with these steps you guys are closer to kind of moving forward and healing as a family and hopefully closing a chapter, or do you feel like there's still some pieces to put in the puzzle?
We can never heal, but we can just be a big family that we always have been. We always been together. The same thing we did with George, we still do it. Just like me, when I want to feel like I'm closer to George, I always eat me a banana mayonnaise sandwich, because that's something that we did together. And watching sports and different things and praying, I think about George all the time. And people walk up to me all the time and say the same thing about it. Hey man, George has helped change the world. And I'd say I'm happy the fact that more people are willing to talk about what's going on in America. But the fact that I lost my brother, my loved one, somebody who I can count on when I was down, it hurts me. And that's something that I can never take away, because I cry about it all the time. Just knowing that his daughter would never be able to walk down the aisle, she would never be able to have a daddy-daughter dance, things like that. It just makes me, go up under. And I could have stayed hidden up on the rock, but instead I came out being able to speak with you all.
All right. We appreciate you all coming. We want to get back to Minneapolis to lend some support to the family of Daunte Wright as the Kim Potter trial is going on. And let's all keep that family in mind today as well. But thank you all for being so brave for all of us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank y'all so much.
Okay, so obviously that earlier today, following the guilty plea from Derek Chauvin. More to come out of that and more to come out of the Kim Potter trial moving through the rest of the week. Well, it's after 10 o'clock here in Phoenix, Arizona, almost midnight. Well, it is midnight on the East Coast. We appreciate all of you guys being with us here on Live Now from Fox. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. Look from our Phoenix, Arizona studio here. We have been covering all of this crazy news, specifically weather news, ripping across our country, the Midwest, with tornado warnings and wind gusts of 90 miles per hour and up. But we really haven't seen any major damage. We saw some coming out of the Minnesota area, and likely tomorrow we'll be getting more reports of how the wind gusts have affected any areas, but no tornadoes up to this point in the evening. But those tornadoes in Kentucky, man, those communities still reeling from all of that. The president himself, President Biden, making his way out to Mayfield, Kentucky, standing alongside Governor Andy Beshear and the First Lady in Kentucky, talking to the communities who have been directly affected on what aid they're going to try to provide, not even just now, but in the coming months and years, really, as a lot of these places try to just piece together their lives once again. So we're going to play that out for you, part of the president's visit. We also have some other stories. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi holding a briefing today alongside Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, talking about inflation and, of course, COVID-19. The Omicron variant providing a little bit of a scare for the United States and just globally as well. So the White House Coronavirus Task Force holding a briefing too. So all ends covered here on Live Now from Fox, but we're going to go first out to Kentucky.
And elderly alike, wiping out towns almost entirely and leaving our landscape almost unrecognizable. This town is part of who I am. I spent Christmases on a porch that, thank God, is still standing, not too far from here. My granddad